The link to the story will be in the description. Dining with Divinity by Soul Reaper Crew.
Part 10 Underworld. Where is he taking us? Melano whispered, falling in a step beside Hecate. The two goddesses walked side by side, about 2 meters behind Jiraiya, as the man led them away from the hot springs. He hasn't said much since he told us who he was. What do you make of all this? Next to her, the eyes of the green goddess remained firmly on the back of their new acquaintance. She was still uneasy at how easily he took her spear from her hands. Never had a mortal or an immortal disarmed her in such quick fashion. The man was a skilled warrior, but to what degree, she was still unsure. It's hard to say, Hecate replied. One moment this man is ogling naked women through a peephole in the fence of a hot spring. The next thing we know, his whole facade of a pervert disappears, and this serious personality appears. You don't think he's a pervert? Or a big one, as he puts it. Oh, I think he's a pervert. However, there's more to him than that. She added, almost like it's a mask to draw someone to assess them with the hidden personality behind what you see. As Melano mentioned, the man hadn't told them much since the reveal earlier. After the reveal of being Naruto's godfather, he went a step further and added that he was also the blonde's mentor. A mentor in what? They didn't know. He stopped there and told them to follow him if they wanted answers. So they did, and they could only hope they didn't regret that decision. Both turned their heads and looked at Jiraiya. The white-haired spirit was looking at them from the corner of his eye, amusement clear for all to see. You two aren't being quiet. I can't hear you. Melano crossed hers as they walked. Well, it wasn't like we're trying to hide anything. Besides, don't you know it's rude to eavesdrop on someone's conversation? A bark of laughter escaped from the man. I would, but after years of intel gathering and listening into people's conversation, I've developed acute hearing whether I like it or not. A snort broke from the goddess of ghosts. Are you going to tell us where we're going yet? Now, Jiraiya replied, making small gestures with his hands. Don't worry about a thing. We haven't got long to go. A couple more minutes and we'll be there. And where are we going? You haven't given us any information. The white-haired spirit simply told them to follow him if they wanted to learn about Naruto Uzumaki. Though both were cautious about where he was planning on taking them, Melano wanted answers. She was close to getting them, and if it meant following this perverted man, then so be it. Hecate, meanwhile, wasn't going to let Melano go too far over the line. What they were doing right now, making conversation with the spirits of the dead without the consent of Hades, was a big no-no. Not to mention, they were in a part of the underworld that was off-limits to everyone. If Thanatos came flying overhead and spotted them, then it was game over for their little adventure. He would go to Hades, and the Lord of the Underworld would drag them back willing or unwilling. She'd seen Hades when he got angry. No thanks. She didn't want to experience his anger directed at her. Sure, Melano would get disciplined in some way. Hades would surely get creative with her punishment, and Persephone would throw her 2 drachmas into the matter. The Queen of the Underworld liked to stay involved in that way, despite being stuck on the surface. But for Hecate, she could see Hades concocting something special for her. In a sense, she was enabling Melano to go on this little quest of hers. She caught her red-handed and chose to help her rather than convince her not to go ahead with her plan. Don't worry. Don't get your panties in a bunch over little details. What did you say? He spun his head around, giving them a view of his face. Jiraiya frowned with his lips pouting forward. For a pair of goddesses, you're not nearly as fun as I thought you'd be. You take everything so personally. His hands came up and rested behind the back of his head. There was a jovial step to his walk. This is the first time I think a goddess like yourself has ever come all this way to our little slice of paradise. At least, since we all first moved in. Man, that was a long time ago. So, you have met another god before? Melano asked. Jiraiya nodded. Oh yeah, for sure. As I said, it was a long time ago. I remember when this place used to be a big bowl of chaos. You couldn't tell which way was left or right or up and down. You used to have to go with the flow and all that. Both immortals nodded. His words confirmed what they initially knew about the time frame of the old souls. You talk about the time the underworld was under the watch of the Titan Iapetus, a time when the souls of the dead ran rampant over the underworld. The white-haired man shrugged. I guess. I don't know anyone by that name. Then again, that proves the guy didn't do his job of running the show. All I remember is one day, some big guy in a helmet appeared one day and started judging us by the good and bad deeds in our lives. Many of us came here, and others we never saw again. Melano nodded. It sounded like her father was much more hands-on when it came to the judging on the souls that came into his domain. These days, he left it to his 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. The trio had served as the judges of the dead for a long time. Though they did the job well, Melano felt the 3 took too many liberties with the power they wielded. All 3 had inflated egos. It was only natural with the given responsibilities they were possessed. Perhaps a change was in order soon. The man in the helmet was my father, Melano revealed, observing how Jiraiya's dark eyes settled on her. He's Hades, Lord of the Underworld. This time, Jiraiya nodded. You don't say. The name does ring a bell. Call him too curious, but he'd always wonder who the man in the helmet was. The memory was something that lingered in the back of his mind, even after all these years. He appeared out of nowhere, forming from a shadow that would have made the Naras envious. No one had sensed him. It was like he blinked into existence. He didn't give them time to react before they were all wrapped up into the shadows. The next thing anyone knew, they were in this paradise called Elysium, and it was to be their home until the end of time. Some faces disappeared entirely. They weren't as squeaky clean as the rest of them. He wasn't sure where they went, but he had a feeling they didn't go without putting up a fight, so he runs the show down here. And you're his heir? A princess. A scowl heavily marred Melano's face. Don't call me that. Mau, so serious. The goddess growled through her teeth, while Hecate rolled her eyes and listened to the back and forth. Jiraiya sure knew how to push Melano's buttons. She pitched in her thoughts on his words. As gods or goddesses, we do not have heirs the same way mortal rulers do. Though Melano is the daughter of Lord Hades, that by no means sets her up as a candidate to one day rule the underworld. As immortal beings that live forever, we could potentially rule over our domains forever. Typically, there are 2 ways for a god or goddess to give up their rule over such things, such as for that god or goddess to willingly separate themselves from their domain, though no immortal in their right mind would ever do such a thing. Our domains help make us what we are, Hecate explained, with Melano nodding along with her words. The second is for that immortal to be removed from the picture indefinitely. Jiraiya nodded. When you say indefinitely, you mean? He ran his finger across his throat with a knowing expression on his face. Correct. Boy, oh, dash, Kia. I got you now. The sound of someone shouting caused the 2 goddesses to jump back in mild surprise before Hecate reformed her spear into her hands. They needn't have worried, as a blur dived out of one of the trees to the left, aimed at the white-haired spirit taking the lead. They both watched as a look of annoyance washed over his face, and saw as he sidestepped out of the way and stuck one hand out. His hand grabbed the blur, spinning his body as he caught them in his grip and hung them upside down. Incredible reflexes, both immortals thought. It was beyond anything modern demigods and some gods could perform. He did it effortlessly, too. Nice try, Gaki, but you're still too young to pull one over on me, you know, Jiraiya exclaimed, grinning down at the body caught between his fingers. Try again in a few more centuries. Maybe you'll have better luck. He started poking the smaller body with his index finger, causing them to squirm and try to sway away. Moo, pervy sage. The body wiggled harder in the air, trying to escape, though found little luck. Would you stop calling me that? Hecate and Melano snorted at the name. It was strangely appropriate for the man. As the 2 listened to the back and forth between Jiraiya and his assailant, the 2 lingered their gaze. The new spirit was a young girl, somewhere between 12 and 14. She was on the petite side with a light complexion and dark blue hair cut into a bob. Melano found herself admiring the color. She'd never seen naturally blue hair before. At least, not on a human before. She was cute in the girl next door kind of way, with a round face and blue eyes. A striking feature, both found themselves staring at was the two whisker marks on either side of her cheeks. Whisker marks, Melano thought. A familiar blonde barista had similar markings on his cheek, if she recalled. Not to mention, the pull she was feeling for this girl in her gut was immensely strong. It was stronger than what she initially felt from Jiraiya. "What are you doing here, Hima? Did your mom send you?" Jiraiya asked, finally putting the girl on the floor. Despite the initial annoyance on his face, both goddesses could see the endearment in his eyes and voice. She must have been someone near and dear to him since she was trying to plant her foot in his face moments earlier. The girl patted her jumper down, before dazzling them all with a smile that struck all their hearts. "Nope. Grandma sent me. She said to tell you to move your lazy, but otherwise, there'll be no food left for you. And we're making Boruto's favorite. Grandma said if you're not there soon, then you're going without. You know spirits don't need food. They don't need a peep, but you still do it." She shrugged her shoulders, looking at him with absolute innocence. "Fine, fine," he replied, before pointing over to the pair of immortals watching them curiously. "Can't you see I have guests following me? That's why I'm late. Why don't you say hello?" Before Melano and Hecate could blink, the girl was in front of them. Her big blue eyes blinked up at them, filled with excitement and curiosity. "Wow, you knew." The pair looked at one another. "Hello," both said, greeting the young woman. "We haven't had anyone new in forever. Like in a long time." She put her hands in the air to amplify how long. "That's typically what forever means," Hecate told her in a matter-of-fact tone. "They know. I said that already," Jiraiya replied, motioning for them to keep going and resuming the trip. "Let's keep going. I don't want Kushina and Tsunade to have my ass for being late." "But who are they? Why don't you ask them? It's polite to introduce yourself before asking for someone's name. Remember." The little girl did just that, and spun around on her heel to face them again. "Hi, I'm Himawari. Who are you?" She poked her thumb into her chest. "She's very peppy and spirited." They thought before Melano went ahead and explained who they were. Suffice to say, learning she was in the presence of two goddesses was enough for her eyes to sparkle in fascination and excitement. "Wow, you're actual goddesses." "We are, and you live forever. Last we checked." "Wow, does that mean you know my dad?" "Your dad?" Hecate asked. The moment Melano heard that, her thoughts began to spin. The image of Naruto Uzumaki appeared in her mind and started comparing his face with the little girl's. There was a great deal in their features that were alike. The blue eyes, the round face, the smile, the whisker-like markings on their cheeks. It was as if someone copied his likeness on this little girl. "The one you're asking about?" Jiraiya nodded his head towards her. "Naruto's her father." Neither appeared surprised. Even Hecate, who hadn't met the blonde shinobi, had a feeling that the way it was leaning. "I thought as much. The likeness is uncanny," Melano replied. "Mom says I look a lot like my dad, but you should see Boruto," Himawari added, falling in a step next to Hecate and surprising the elder-looking woman. With her hands behind her back, Himawari looked the picture of innocence. "Boruto, my big brother. He's 3 years older, though I'm much more mature." Himawari looked proud of that statement, gaining a smug look. "Even Mom says so. Grandma says girls mature quicker than boys, even if they're younger." "I see. Are there any more kids we should be aware of? Or does the drachma stop with you and your brother?" "Nope, just the two of us." Himawari's face scrunched up in confusion. "What's a drachma?" The back and forth between Himawari and the immortals continued for the duration of the journey. The pair of immortals answered what they could, though every time Melano was about to respond with a question of her own, Himawari would beat her to it. If she didn't know any better, she would have said the girl had Aphrodite's divine essence running through her. However, she couldn't sense a single drop within her body and put that thought to rest. Eventually, after another 10 minutes of walking and making idle chat with their fourth companion, they found themselves at the end of the path with Jiraiya standing at an opening in the tree waiting for them. "So, are you both ready?" "Ready? For what?" "To get your answers," he revealed. "To understand who Naruto Uzumaki is and the man he is, you have to speak to the people who knew him the best. The people he affected while still alive and who made the biggest impact on him as a person. As much as I'd like to take all the credit, I'm but one factor to his makeup. To understand him, you have to speak to the people who love him the most. Both nodded and made a step forward when Jiraiya put his arm, blocking their path. What is it? Hecate asked, glancing at the man from the corner of her eyes. Her spear was still in her grip and toyed with it between her fingers. Deep down, a small part of her hoped he tried something. Despite being willing to aid Melino in her quest to know more about Naruto Uzumaki, the goddess of magic wanted to demonstrate his taking off her spear was a fluke. She wouldn't be caught unprepared again. I want to make one thing clear about what you're walking into. His dark eyes hardened. Despite being a spirit, an aura of authority hummed around him, reminding them both of the elder gods. It was a way to command the attention of the people in the room. I've let you come this far because I think you're honest in your intentions and I like to think I'm a good read on people. Then again, I willingly admit that in the past, I've made some mistakes and put my trust in the wrong people. The image of his former teammate flashed across his mind. All I'm going to tell you both is this. If I detect even a hint of deceit in your words and about your intentions, you will be sorry. The air bristled around the two immortals, and both stood straighter. The atmosphere became heavier. Are you threatening us, spirit? Hecate asked, wishing now more than ever to poke him full of holes with her spear. It's not a wise course of action, Melino added, standing shoulder to shoulder with the elder immortal. The whites of their eyes began to glow and shine with brilliant gold. One would have thought two goddesses like themselves standing side by side and facing down a single soul would have forced the individual to shudder in terror and regret speaking. Instead, the white-haired man backed up his claim by crossing his arms and staring them down. Refusing to budge or show the change in the atmosphere bothered him. Himawari merely smiled off to the side and patiently waited for them to finish with her hands clasped behind her back. Maybe not, but my words still stand, Jiraiya added. He showed no sign of letting the leak of power coming from the pair bother him. It looked like it barely tickled him. Allowing for cooler heads to prevail and seeing their show of strength wasn't having the desired effect. Melino was the first to lose her glow, followed soon after by Hecate. The power leaking out from them was only a small portion of their divine essence, but neither could afford to release anything higher. Otherwise, they run the risk of being noticed by Hades and Thanatos. We stand by what I told you earlier. We're here to learn and nothing more. Afterwards, we'll leave you all peace. A hum emanated from Jiraiya's throat, glancing at the two immortals for a moment. Just so you know, if you did try something, he pointed his thumb at the opening, the people on the other side will make you regret it. We might not have our chakra in death, but that doesn't make us useless. With that, Jiraiya spun around, walked through the entrance, and made a motion for everyone to follow him. Himawari skipped along in front of them, and after a moment of letting his words sink in, Melino and Hecate followed suit. Just who in the world was waiting for them on the other side? And what was chakra? Stepping through the clearing, Melino found herself stopping after only a couple of steps through the opening in the trees. The area they were in was idyllic, and how mortals must imagine paradise. A small lake sat to the left of them, with a bank of white sand settled between the water and the grass. On the sand, she spied a group of people with their backs to them, situated around a barbecue and a set of picnic blankets. What made her stop, however, was the man waiting for the halfway between them and the group. If she didn't already know Naruto Uzumaki was alive, she would claim that he stood in front of them. The same blue eyes and the shock of golden, sun-kissed hair. He looked no older than his mid-20s. When the man began walking closer, Melino started to see the slight differences between them. The man's hair was longer, with bangs framing his face, and his face was more angular. He lacked the whisker-like markings on his cheeks too, and held an aura of confidence around him. Looking at him with a hard gaze, she could tell he was the kind of man who would catch the attention of the goddess of wisdom. His eyes held an intelligence in them that would catch her attention with a glance. Jiraiya-sensei, it's about time you arrived, they heard the man reply, stopping a few feet from Jiraiya and smiling at the older man. And you brought guests? His gaze swept over them, and to their surprise, gave a small bow. It's nice to meet you. I'm Minato. Grandpa. Look, look. Himawari skipped over to the man, and the pair watched as Minato put his arm around the girl and placed a delicate kiss on the top of her head. The act made the girl beam with delight. These are my two new friends, Melino and Hecate. They're goddesses, and they know Dad. This is Naruto's father. Melino realized in her head and shared a look with Hecate. The goddess of magic realized it too. He must have died young if he looks the same age as his son. Minato blinked in surprise. His mouth was trying to form words, but nothing was coming out. He turned to look at Jiraiya, who remained silent, though nodded his head to confirm her words. Audibly gulping, he asked, "You know my son?" A hopeful look was in his eyes. "We do." They came hoping to learn more about the blonde Gaki, Jiraiya mentioned, as he set off towards the group resting on the sand. The group were all looking their way, likely wondering who their guests were. I saw no harm. Instantly, Melino and Hecate found themselves ushered forward, with Minato gently guiding Melino forward and Jiraiya walking behind her at a leisurely pace. Hecate was being pulled forward by Himawari, the little girl with one of her hands on the goddess's wrist. Though surprised at how overly friendly the young girl was, she didn't fight it and make a scene. The girl appeared curious about her. She wasn't used to children acting in such a way around her. Most tended to keep their distance thanks to the mysterious aura she outputted. "Kushina, come here for a moment." Minato called out, a sense of urgency in his voice. "You too, Mama." "Boruto," Himawari shouted, giggling all the while. Shrugging, Jiraiya added his voice, "Haim, you might as well too." Reacting to the voice, Melino watched as the four figures, now realizing they were the bodies of 3 women and a teenage boy, all got up and met them halfway. The first person Melino paid attention to was the teenage boy. It wasn't hard to determine who he was, given he shared the same blonde hair and blue eyes as his father and grandfather. The main difference was the scar that ran down his right eye, giving him the kind of appeal that would draw the likes of Aphrodite out from her temple. He was handsome too, not that looks was doing anything for her. It was just something she noticed. He stood taller than the 3 women. From the women, the first she focused on was the woman in the middle. It was hard to look away. Her hair was the most beautiful shade of red Melino had ever seen and reached to her shins. It was perfectly straight, with it flowing from side to side like a velvety curtain. It was hard not to reach out and run her hand through to see if it was as silky as she imagined. Her eyes were the color violet, and she stood the shortest of the 3 women. Looking at her features, Melino could see distinct similarities between this woman and Naruto. The shape of her face, the shape of her eyes, her smile. She could only be one person. The second woman also had a feature that caught her attention, though it wasn't her hair. Whoa, look at the size of those. Admittedly, the first thing she noticed was the woman's chest. To say she was busty was an understatement. Her grandmother, Lady Demeter, was known throughout Olympus to be the bustiest of her fellow goddesses, something she enjoyed lauding over them whenever she had too much of Dionysus's wine. This woman was comparable, if not a little bigger. If she was still alive, she had no doubt one of the gods would have tried to woo her. Along with her notable bust, her blonde hair fell into pigtails down to the middle of her back. Her eyes were also hazel. She was beautiful. Who am I kidding? All I can look at are those giant melons. Ending with the third woman, she too was beautiful and exotic looking. One look at the woman's indigo hair, cut into a bob, was enough for Melino to know who she was. Like Naruto, many of her features passed down to Himawari. Her skin was a tone lighter than the other 2 women, but stood the tallest out of the 3. She dressed conservative, but it did little to hide the curves sitting beneath the fabric. What was it with the women of the Golden Age? Why were they all stunning? Something in the water? Aphrodite wasn't born from the sea until centuries later, so there were no daughters of Aphrodite running around yet. "Let me introduce you to 4 of the most important people in the Gaki's life," Jiraiya told her, and pointed at each one as they neared the group. "The kid is Boruto, his son, though you probably already figured that out." Melino nodded. "The blonde woman is Tsunade, the 5th Hokage and my old teammate." You could say she was a motherly figure in his life, trying to keep him on the straight and narrow when his knucklehead ways got him into trouble. The redhead is Kushina, his mom, and Minato's wife. She runs a tight ship in their marriage, if you know what I mean. He followed up his statement with a whip noise. In front of them, Minato turned and frowned at his sensei, earning a shrug from the older man. Finally, the lovely lady with indigo hair is Hinata, his wife and the love of his life. Though she figured that out already, Melino was grateful for the confirmation. "Who's this?" Tsunade asked the first to reach them with a raised eyebrow. She looked the two goddesses up and down, her guard up around the pair of strangers. "I've never seen either of them from around here, and we know everyone. Who are you, girly?" "Girly?" Melino and Hecate opened their mouths to speak, though Jiraiya beat them to it. Now, Haim, is that any way to speak to a pair of goddesses?" Jiraiya asked. Instantly, both eyebrows rose from the statement. "Goddesses? Seriously, Jiraiya? How much sake have you been drinking?" "It's true. I swear. It's true, Grandma Tsunade. They are goddesses," Himawari added, letting go of Hecate and moving next to Tsunade, looking up at her with those big blue eyes. "Pervy Sage wouldn't lie about something like that." "I think you give him too much credit," Tsunade mumbled, though patted the little girl on the head. Jiraiya slumped, his arms hanging in the air. "So mean, Haim. For good reason, you perv." "Okay, this is taking longer than I imagined." Melino thought and decided to intervene before an argument broke out. The blonde woman, Tsunade, looked ready to knock Jiraiya in the air if the twitch of her right fist was any indication. "He tells the truth. My name is Melino, goddess of ghosts and the daughter of Hades, ruler of the underworld." That piece of information was enough to catch their attention. "I'm here to learn about Naruto Uzumaki." Instantly, their backs all straightened and stared at the goddesses with something akin to wonder and shock. "You know my dad?" Boruto whispered, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of denial and hope. "I wouldn't say I know him, but I've met him." She revealed their focus on her unwavering. "He's a peculiar man. Since he appeared, the gods of my family have been drawn to him like a flame attracts a moth. You're souls that predate my family, the Olympians. We are a family of gods that rule over much of the world in secret, doing so for over 5,000 years. Naruto Uzumaki, for reasons I failed to understand at first, had connections and ties to you all, which should be impossible. Now, though, that question is answered given I have learned your relations with him." However, her frown deepened. A new question has appeared. If Naruto Uzumaki was alive in your time, a time we refer to as the Golden Age, then how is he still alive all these millennia later? As she spoke, everyone, Jiraiya, Himawari, and Minato included, looked as if a fist hit them in the gut. Minato turned around and put his hands over his head, now letting everyone see his troubled expression. His wife moved over to his side, a dazed expression on her face, mumbling something to herself and shaking her head. "Minato, I know, Kushina, I know. Why isn't he here with us?" The question broke through as a sob escaped the red-haired woman, prompting her blonde husband to put an arm around her shoulders and bring her in close. 5,000 years, Jiraiya muttered to himself, shaking his head and looking at the ground. "Has it been that long?" Boruto added, his hands in his pockets, and swallowed a thick gulp. "Time works a little differently here compared to the rest of the world," Hecate revealed, watching Himawari move to stand beside her mother. After a while, time becomes distorted. "Is okay?" A muffled voice asked. The voice came from Hinata, the pale-eyed woman who had her mouth covered by her hands. Her knees looked ready to give out. Slowly, she was walking until she stopped a foot away from the goddess of ghosts. "Is he okay?" For the most part, she revealing what she sensed from Naruto concerning his emotional ties to them. "He misses you all. He misses you all a great deal." A sob broke from Hinata. "We miss him. I miss him. Do you have any answers to my question? How after all this time, he's still alive?" She was hoping for some kind of answer that would fill in the blank pieces in her mind. If anyone knows, it must be the family? To her disbelief, it was Boruto who answered her, and it wasn't the answer she hoped to get. "We were hoping you might know that answer, because we don't know either." After the eventful day at the Fox's Den and finding himself forced to close early for the day, The blonde shinobi found himself entertaining his two guests at his home. Despite living in New York for nearly 6 months, this was the first time he had guests. Fortunately, he didn't need to worry about impressing either of them with the inside of his home. Any renovations he was making to the townhouse ended over a fortnight ago, leaving him pleased with the work he and his clones put in. One guest was still unconscious in one of the guest rooms. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, with a pack of aspirin ready and waiting for the oncoming headache the blonde woman was going to experience. He didn't envy her. Then again, she only had herself to blame. His other guest, though he was entertaining in his kitchen, awaiting the dinner he promised her when transporting them from the Denver. Her dark blue eyes radiated excitement and licked her lips as the smell wafted around her nose. It was adorable. A glass that was half full of juice sat to one side, with a tiny splash next to the coaster. A stack of papers with colored pens and pencil sat neatly in the corner. Order up. 1 cheeseburger with no pickles and a side of curly fries for the little lady. Naruto called out, striding across his kitchen with the plate resting on his fingertips. Yay! The little girl cheered, eyes lighting up when the plate sat in front of her. Bringing Talia and her mom to his home was not something he planned when the older woman fell into unconsciousness. His first train of thought had been to call the emergency services and have someone come and pick them up. In all likelihood, ending up drunk with your kid in tow would not go down well with the authorities. If the local child services got involved, they would inevitably conduct some form of investigation on the pair. They would want to know if today's actions on the mother's behalf for getting drunk in the middle of the day was a regular occurrence or a one-off. Either way, he'd been a second away from walking to his phone when he noticed eyes watching them from across the road, hidden behind the trash cans and dumpsters. Someone like Talia, who gave off an aura that attracted the worst kind of creatures in her general direction, was like honey to a hungry bear. To him, monsters left him well enough alone, no matter which corner of the world. Let's just say, monsters, no matter the pantheon, chose to keep their distance from the shinobi. It wasn't in their best interest unless they wanted a one-way ticket to hell. Monsters, no matter what form they took a keen interest in demigods. It was like they were the special of the day on a menu for an exclusive diner that catered only to monsters. A rare treat that they couldn't ignore, no matter how hard they tried. Little Talia, with the aura she didn't know she possessed, was like a magnet for those monsters. If it wasn't for his presence near the little girl, then he imagined those monsters would have tried to swarm the house if the opportunity appeared. He wasn't about to let that happen. So, before leaving the fox's den with Talia clinging to his side and her mother sleeping on his back in the form of a piggyback, he sent another clone to take care of the creature before it gathered its courage. When the memories of his clone returned to him, all he found was his clone landing on the shoulders of a wide-shouldered, one-eyed man. He didn't give the creature a chance to react before twisting his body around and snapping the creature's neck with an audible crunching noise. The last thing he saw was the monster bursting into a cloud of gold dust before the clone dispelled himself. Taking a seat next to her at the little table tucked away in the kitchen, he watched with an amused smile as she tore away at the burger. He tried not to laugh, but the little girl had ketchup all over her mouth. She was about to wipe her mouth with her sleeve before he stopped her. Grabbing a napkin laid out on the table, he gently wiped her face. We don't want ketchup and grease all over your nice clothes, do we? He couldn't stop the smile on his face. It doesn't matter. It's only clothes. The girl whined, causing him to chuckle. The way she wriggled around and pouted when he cleared her face reminded him of the times he did something similar for Baruto. Himawari was a little angel when it came to keeping herself clean. Baruto, on the other hand, was the polar opposite. If he saw a puddle in the street, his little boy had to jump in it, while Himawari would walk around it. Judging by Talia's pouty face, she was in the same vein as his son. Then again, he was the same way at that age, too. I know, but I'm sure your mom spent a lot of money on them. We don't want to ruin them, do we? The pout continued, and his smile widened when she let out a low huff. She was so cheeky. Before long, she was devouring the curly fries at an astonishing rate, reminding him of a particular customer who shoveled cake in her mouth like it was her last meal. At the very least, Talia had better table manners and stopped to breathe. "Wow," he said, watching as Talia finished the final few curly fries and looked up at him with those big blue eyes. "That was yummy." The little girl hummed, nodding her head. "Uh-huh, it was good. It was the best burger ever." "Really? Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I don't get to make cheeseburgers and curly fries often, but I'm glad you liked it." She grinned up at him. "They're my favorite." I could tell. I didn't think someone so small could eat it that quickly. I wonder where it all goes. Talia's face scrunched up. "Moo, I'm not little." Chuckling, he patted the top of her head. Despite having met a few hours ago, he got the chance to chat with Talia as prepared her dinner. He listened to her retell the story of what happened with her mom in a way only a 4-year-old could. It took a few minutes to absorb the information, but he thought he understood the gist of what happened yesterday. According to Talia, she and her mom lived in L.A. At least, that's what he assumed when she said she lived in a house near the big word on the hill. She and her mom had gotten on a plane yesterday and flew to New York, with her mom bringing with them a suitcase full of dresses, shoes, and makeup. From the way she described them, it sounded like they weren't the cheap kinds either. He got the feeling Talia didn't care much for dresses and made a face when she described her mom spending the whole night trying on different dresses and different shoes. When they woke up, she dragged Talia out and told her they were going to see her father. Afterwards, she reiterated what he already knew. They went to the big building, the Empire State Building, and tried to get in the elevator. However, before they could step through the gates, a man stopped them and told them they couldn't go up. Her mom argued with the man, pulling Talia in front of her and pointing to her. The man looked at her once, but repeated the same thing over and over again. That's when her mom started shouting, demanding to see Zeus. Zeus, Naruto thought, his fingers tapping against the table. The big man of Olympus. The god of the sky. The king of the gods. And Talia's biological father. He knew Talia's divine parent had to be a powerful god, but he didn't think it would be that one. Mythology always pictured Zeus the same. A large, broad-chested man, standing larger than any man had any right to be, wielding the power of lightning with his bare hands, and casting judgment onto those who wronged him. He was married to a beautiful goddess, and yet couldn't help but be led astray and into the waiting arms of one woman to the next. In this case, that woman was Talia's mom, and Talia was the result of their union. Despite all his time walking the world, the blonde shinobi didn't have the pleasure of meeting the man. A part of him hoped he didn't have to. The god of the sky didn't provide him with the best impression. Eventually, Talia's mom gave up and found herself in a bar not far from the famous skyscraper. Apparently, to his surprise, Talia's mom was a famous TV actress. He wasn't big on TV, so this was news to him. When she stepped into the bar, no one paid any attention to the little girl that was with her. All they cared about was giving the celebrity free drinks and gaining some of the fame she carried with her. After a few hours, she wound up at the Fox's Den, and the rest was history. He could only imagine what someone of Talia's age thought of the whole situation. A mother who drank her sorrows away, and a father who was absent for all her life. Her mom had done enough thus far for Talia that she appeared to be happy and healthy. However, in his mind, a cocktail of chaos was slowly beginning to bubble up from within the small family unit. Talia's mom had fallen into the hands of God and fallen for his charm. Now, despite being given the greatest gift of all, it still wasn't enough. Feeling someone pull on his shirt sleeve, Naruto broke out of his thoughts and turned to Talia. "Sorry, Talia. Did you say something?" I said, "What are we having for dessert?" He could see the excitement in her eyes. Seeing that look, how could he disappoint her? The smile returned to his face. Naruto stood up from his chair and tapped his chin. Let me think." He wandered over to the fridge and opened the door to the mini freezer. Building up dramatics, he reached inside and shuffled his hand to build up the dramatics. Talia had turned around on her chair, her knees resting on the seat and her chin and fingers sitting on the backrest. The little girl gave Naruto her full attention as he continued to mess around. Pulling out his arm, he pulled out a big tub of ice cream and laughed when he got an excited yelp from Talia. He could have made anything for the little girl. If she wanted it, then he would make it, no matter how long it took him. Cake, pie, tarts, anything. However, sometimes when you've had a hard day and you need comfort food, there are few better than ice cream. Sometimes he even enjoyed taking the tub out of the freezer and chowing down with a spoon in his hand. Pulling out a little spoon for Talia and a big spoon for himself, he flicked off the top of the tub with his thumb and planted it on the table between them. Handing her the spoon, Talia was quick to notice the flavor. Chocolate, Talia said in glee. Naruto winked at her and made her giggle. Chocolate was the best flavor. Of course, it's the best flavor. Scooping some up, he sighed happily as the rich taste of the ice cream enveloped his taste buds. You'd better take some, or I might eat it all. He heard the gasp from Talia and watched the little spoon get put into action. Soon enough, her face was covered in ice cream. Unlike before, he didn't wipe her face since he was aware of the streak of chocolate running down his chin. He heard Talia giggle at his face and stuck his tongue out in response. When she did the same, the two fell into a fit of giggles. All the while, one thought was running through his mind. Don't get too attached. It was hard not to. The little girl was like a breath of fresh air, a pure soul that he wasn't sure the world deserved. She would be gone once her mom woke up, returning to L.A., and he would be a memory she would forget. Hours later, Naruto found himself in the second guest bedroom, gently lowering Talia onto the sheets. The little girl had been a bundle of energy after her dessert, and after a while, he found himself dusting off some old board games in the attic to keep her entertained. It was after the sixth game of Chutes and Ladders did Talia's eyes begin to droop. He told himself it was only a matter of time. He stood correct when she released a series of yawns. Having the sense to send a clone to pick up an extra toothbrush while they played, he took the girl's shoes and socks off before lowering her head onto the pillow. He chuckled when a cute little snore broke out. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. He pulled the covers up to her shoulders, watching with tender eyes as she shuffled around before falling still. Soon enough, the only sounds coming from Talia were the sounds of her breathing. Good night, Talia, he whispered, lowering himself to kiss the girl on the head, but stopped himself halfway. A frown washed over his face, shaking his head as the realization of what he was doing hit him. Instead, he gently patted her on the shoulder and tiptoed out the room, leaving the halfway light on and the door ajar slightly. Most kids didn't like the dark. What a day this turned out to be. He muttered to himself, noticing the door to Talia's mother's room was still closed. He was beginning to doubt the woman would be up until tomorrow. She already slept the rest of the afternoon and the evening away. Heading down the staircase, he picked up a small stack of paper on a side cabinet beside the doors and headed into his kitchen. Making himself a coffee, decaf, since he didn't want to be up all night, he settled in for the evening and took out a pen from one of the many drawers spread out through the kitchen. Ripping open the seal on the envelope, he sighed as he laid out all the bits of paper occupied inside. Bills. Everyone's favorite chores. These were the bills for the Fox's Denver. All right, let's assess the damage this time. It was around 11 p.m., just as Naruto had finished up his duties for the evening, that he heard movement coming from above him. The bills were paid and filed away, and the specials for the next couple of weeks finished when the familiar sound of feet hitting carpet reached his ears. Putting down his half-drunk, second decaffeinated coffee of the evening, he focused on the movement coming from above. He closed his eyes. The footsteps wandered the guest room for a couple of minutes. She was likely gathering her bearings and trying to figure out where she was. It must have been disorientating waking up in a place you didn't recognize after drinking harsh alcohol. Her head must have been killing her, and he hoped for her sake she took the painkillers he left on the bedside table. After 5 minutes, he heard the sound of the guest room door open with a soft click, and his guest walked into the hallway. The footfalls went all along the carpet, the clicks of doors opening as the woman checked each room. When she got to the room Talia was residing in, he listened to her walk inside and approach the bed. He could picture in his head the blonde woman with her hair a mess kneeling next to the bed her daughter was sleeping peacefully in, her hand gently stroking the top of her hair. She would whisper soft nothings in her ear, little things that a parent would say to their children while they slept. He smiled at the image. Instead, he was surprised to hear her say nothing, not even a whisper. She stayed in there for a minute before he heard her leave the room. His eyes reopened as her feet hit the stairs and started descending to the ground floor. A frown formed on his face. What's she doing? He thought to himself. He slowly stood up and settled himself under the arch that connected the hallway and the kitchen, waiting for the woman to appear. A pit was forming in his stomach. One he hoped was over nothing. Eventually, Talia's mom set foot on the ground floor, her shoes in one of her hands along with her purse. She stopped momentarily to let out a series of coughs, before wiping her mouth with her hand and rubbing it away on her clothes. He almost snorted at the action. It was the same action as her daughter from earlier. Patiently, he was waiting for her to turn around and notice him, watching as she slipped her feet back into her heels. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his breath hitched. Instead of turning around, her hand reached the handle for the front door. She wouldn't. Click. Aren't you forgetting something? The sound of his voice was enough to make the woman jump a foot in the air. She spun around and pressed her back against the door, pushing it to a close. Her wide eyes looked at him fearfully as he leaned against the wall, staring at her with a neutral gaze. Her blonde hair swept down one side, and her clothes were full of wrinkles from lying on the bed. Who are you? She breathed out, a large gulp rolling down her throat. One of her hands idly played with the door handle. Naruto Uzumaki. You came to my coffee shop, remember? He replied. Or maybe you don't remember that. You weren't in the best condition when you came in. He made a motion with his hands. This is my home. I brought you here when you collapsed. She looked better and didn't look like a zombie trying to stay upright. Oh, what's your name, by the way? I'm sure you have a name, besides being known as Talia's mom. I'd like to know the name of the woman who collapsed at my place of work. B. Beryl. Beryl Grace. She replied, fear still laced in her voice. You don't know who I am? I'm pretty famous. An incredulous look briefly flashed on her face, like she wasn't used to not getting recognized. Ah, to be famous in the modern world. The blonde shook his head. I'm afraid not. Talia said you were an actress, but I doubt I've seen anything you've acted in. Why not? He shrugged. I'm not much of a television person, I guess. Never have been. Though, I catch the odd movie from time to time. The last movie he remembered seeing was Star Wars Episode 1. The Phantom Menace back in 1999. It was an experience. That's nice. There aren't many people like that these days. I'm a rare breed, I guess. Naruto smiled, before adding, back to my earlier statement, though. Where are you going? Talia's still asleep. Don't you want to be here when she wakes up in the morning? I can make you both breakfast if you'd like that. I'm told by a reliable source that I make a damn good stack of pancakes. He hoped to see the woman react. Instead, Beryl didn't say anything. She averted her eyes from his and was trying to look anywhere else. It wasn't going in the direction he was hoping. Silence befell them before Naruto broke it with a deep sigh. It was a scenario that was getting worse by the second. Beryl didn't appear to want to give him an answer to his question. He could see her hand was still firmly on the door handle. Her thumb itches to twist and pull. You were trying to leave. He came out and said it aloud. The moment his words were spoken, he noticed Beryl's shoulders twitch and shuffle on the spot. You were trying to abandon your daughter in the home of someone you don't know. He wasn't exactly a stranger to Talia anymore, but the statement still stood. He was someone the little girl had known for less than a day. No parent in their right mind would leave their child with someone they only just met. Beryl didn't react. Instead, she kept looking at the ground and averted her gaze. In a sudden move, her hand twisted the handle, pulling the door open and breathing fresh air into the house. She turned around and tried to run out the house, but was taken aback when Naruto appeared next to her. His hand was pressed on the door and guided it back to the lock. He stood there and looked at Beryl with a frosty gaze. SSH. Otherwise you'll wake Talia. How did you move so fast? She hissed. You were on the other side of the hallway. Who are you? The blonde shinobi was a little surprised she got over his speed so quickly, but pushed it to the back of his mind. She must have been used to seeing strange things dating the god of the sky. Someone who cares, and who doesn't want to watch a little girl get her heart broken for being abandoned by the one parent she has left. He replied, You're her mother. You're supposed to be setting an example for her. I never asked to be a parent. Beryl glared back, finding some confidence and squaring her shoulders. It was never supposed to be the plan. Plans change. Not mine. My plan was simple because the only person I had to worry about was myself. A child was never on the to-do list. One hand clenched into a fist. Awards and riches were supposed to mine. I have a talent few in America can match. I was told so by everyone. Then he shows up and gets me knocked up when everything was taking off for me. The venom behind her words surprised him, given how she'd gone begging to her lover's door just to see him. When Zeus showed up, you mean? Revealing his awareness to the father of her child was enough for Beryl to widen her eyes in surprise. You were calling out his name earlier before you collapsed. She looked like she swallowed a lemon and pushed down a harsh gulp before asking, "So you know?" He nodded. "I'm aware that the old myths are not as fictitious as we should believe. Can't say I've met Big Z. I'm not sure if I want to know if half the things I've heard are true." The gods and goddesses he'd met thus far were one thing, but the king was another matter entirely. He wasn't sure he was ready for someone with an ego that made teen Sasuke look like a chump in comparison. He waved a hand in the air, a mask of calm taking over his face. "Look, I'm not going to tell you how to run your life. At the end of the day, you're an adult and it's your life. You get the final say in it. However," he pointed up towards the stairs, "as a parent, your actions have a ripple effect and cross over onto the lives of our children. They need us, and it's up to us to keep them safe and ensure they grow up to be happy. Do you have any idea what kind of effect your choices over the last couple of days have had on Talia? Being dragged across the country and forced to watch as the only parent she's ever known crumbles in front of her and throws herself into drunken oblivion." Beryl tried to speak, but Naruto didn't give her the opportunity and kept going. "No, I don't think you do. Plans change. 9 times out of 10, life throws a curveball at us that changes everything. You might not have the awards and riches you were hoping to have, but you have something far more precious. You have a beautiful little girl who calls you her mom. There are people in the world who would give up everything you mention to have that. Being a parent is a blessing. Having a child of your own who looks up to you, who needs your love and nurture, is one of the best experiences we could have. Don't throw it away because life hasn't gone the way you hoped." All he could do was speak from the heart. Every word and the energy behind them came from his time loving and raising Boruto and Himawari, and how it made him feel watching them grow. Beryl truly didn't understand how lucky she was. Sure, she was a single parent, and that meant raising Talia was going to be harder. She wouldn't have someone to lean on as other parents did. However, with only the two of them in their little family, it meant the relationship between mother and daughter would grow strong. When Talia grew up, they could lean on each other. Being the parent of a demigod wouldn't be easy, but he felt they could push forward as long as they had each other. He hoped Beryl saw the light in his words. "Are you finished with your speech?" And his hopes were dashed as quickly as they appeared. He looked at her with a look of disbelief. He couldn't believe it. The woman looked at him square in the eye. There wasn't a hint of remorse or sadness in her eyes. All he saw was desperation. Desperation to get rid of the child that she felt was holding her back from attaining everything she dreamed of having. He couldn't remember the last time he met someone whose selfishness encompassed their whole being. Shaking his head, Naruto took a couple of steps back, giving Beryl the room to move around. His blue eyes bore into the woman, laced with anger, sadness, and disappointment. He raised his arm, extending towards the door. "I won't stop you. All I can do is hope you see sense." As if she was hammering the nail into the coffin, Beryl scoffed. Smoothing down her clothes, she raised her shoulders to look composed. Beginning to walk, Beryl didn't even glance his way when moving past. She reached out and pulled the door open. There was no hesitation in her steps, nor did she turn to look back at the stairs that led to her daughter's location. Watching Beryl step outside, Naruto couldn't help but grit his teeth when he saw her shoulders slack. If he didn't know any better, he would have thought there was a weight on her shoulders, and it finally lifted away. For so long, Beryl must have seen her daughter as little more than dead weight in her life, causing her to sink further and further away from the life she desperately wanted. "She'll never forgive you," Naruto said aloud as the woman's foot hit the sidewalk. "If you walk away, I promise you it will be the biggest mistake you ever make." His words rang through the near-silent street, the cars and the few pedestrians passing by being none the wiser as to what was happening. Beryl, for a brief moment, stopped as she prepared to take her second step, and Naruto allowed a sliver of hope to worm its way inside. It looked like she was about to turn around by the way her torso shivered. Instead, he was left further disappointed as Beryl shook her head, her blonde locks swaying in the air before continuing to walk away. Naruto stood there on the steps of his home, watching Beryl and hoping she would come back. She never did. When she rounded the corner and disappeared from view, he couldn't contain his feelings anymore and swung his hand down on the metal rail, running along with the steps. The bars did it on impact. He turned around and headed back inside, closing the door behind him. He leaned on the door and closed his eyes as he took in what just happened. What do I do now? He muttered to himself. Right now, a demigod no older than 4 was sleeping soundly, unaware that the only parent she had in her life had walked away and out of her life. He might not have an answer, but he knew someone who could give him one. Pushing himself off the door, he walked into the living room and kneeled in front of the old fireplace that came with the house. Making the tiger hand sign, he performed a small fire jutsu to get a fire going before throwing a few extra pieces of wood to keep the fire burning. That'll do, he muttered to himself, feeling the heat of the fire brush against his skin. Leaving the room and walking back into the kitchen, he focused on the blue and white tin sitting beside a wooden rack with half a dozen coffee mugs sitting neatly in rows of 3. Lifting the lid, a dozen cupcakes sat neatly in 2 rows of 6. The bottom row was decorated with swirls of strawberry frosting, while the top was filled with vanilla. He made them the day before and was glad he did. While they weren't necessarily needed, it did coax the person he needed to come quicker. Food was the best method to entice a person after all. Taking one of the vanilla cupcakes, he walked back into the living room and kneeled by the fire. Sorry I waited this long to invite you over, but I could use your help. I'm in a bit of a pinch. With that statement, he threw the cupcake into the fire. It took a few moments before the desired effect took hold. Instead of watching the sweet treat begin to burn, the flames wrapped around it before vanishing into smoke. He didn't have to wait long. Half a minute later, a gentle knock at the front door alerted him to the visitor, and a familiar aura appeared outside his home. Standing up and walking to the door, he grabbed the door handle and pulled the door open. His earlier grim expression washed away, and a small smile appeared on his face as his blue eyes found himself staring into a pair of warm brown eyes. The scent of toasted marshmallows wafted around his nose. In the palm of her hand sat the cupcake that vanished in the fire moments earlier, already half-eaten and with frosting decorating the woman's lips. He would have made fun of her, but he was too happy to see her to even think about doing it. The woman smiled at him as she gently wiped away flecks of frosting with her index finger. Her dark hair fell into ringlets around her face, swaying as she moved. "Hello, Naruto." His smile widened. "Hello, Hestia." Part XL years ago, away from Olympus, Hestia could finally hear herself think as she kept her eyes on the dark path ahead of her. Selene's light illuminated her way as she trekked through the undergrowth. The first decade had come and gone since the Olympians had begun their rule over the known world, and, as expected, her youngest brother and king of the gods had something big planned for Olympus. All the gods that aligned with Olympus gathered together in the throne room and listened as Zeus decreed a week-long celebration to commemorate their victory over the Titans. The announcement made her roll her eyes good-naturedly, but seeing her siblings excited at the prospect of a week of fun was enough for her to support the decision. It was just a very Zeus decision. The king of the gods loved a good party, though what he loved more was the beautiful nymphs who vied for his attention in their short-length chitons and fluttering eyes. She was sure that was why Zeus threw as many parties and celebrations as he did. He had a weakness when it came to pretty girls, and his wandering eyes and hands were going to get him in trouble one day. She could only hope he and Métis one day tied the knot. She felt Zeus was the kind of man who needed a strong woman to anchor him down and keep him from getting away with everything. Métis was strong-willed and smart, the perfect choice for someone like her youngest brother. Though she wasn't a goddess who frequented many parties and kept to herself most days, the anniversary provided her with a chance to see all her brothers and sisters. Since coming into their domains, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades were rarely in the same room as each other. Hades, since taking over the underworld, rarely came above ground. Her brother didn't talk much about the work he was doing beneath the earth in the few meetings they shared over the decade. All she got was the snippets from her mother. According to her, the underworld had been a mess when Hades took over, and Hades was doing everything he could to overhaul it and bring the creatures that dwelled there to heal. For Poseidon and Zeus, taking control over the sky and the sea was simpler. With Poseidon, reign over the sea was smoothly passed over to Poseidon by their uncle, the eldest of the Titans, Oceanus. The Titan of the sea was the only son of Auranes and Gaea that refused to aid Kronos in his war against the younger immortals and remained a neutral party. The elder Titan left for deeper sanctuaries within the ocean along with Tethys and many of their children. Since then, Poseidon had built his palace to rival Olympus, to which he dubbed Atlantis. Though she visited only one, Atlantis was a sight to behold. Zeus, on the other hand, had assumed the role of god of the sky in no time, due to the sky having no one to rule over it since the slaying of Auranes. The sky had remained untouched, with only Helios and Selene to safeguard it until someone assumed power over it. It fitted Zeus to a T and went pleasantly with his dominion over lightning. She feared the kind of fun Zeus could get up there. 2 days into the celebration on Olympus, Hestia decided she needed some much-needed peace. She tried to escape to her temple to get a few hours to herself, but she was rudely interrupted by Demeter and Selene. The moon titan and the goddess of the harvest wasted little time in looping their arms through hers and dragging her back to the throne room. Everyone cheered when Hestia got pulled back, making her huff in annoyance at her rotten luck. After much due diligence on her part, she was finally able to slip away unseen and unnoticed when everyone was distracted by the scene of Hera trying to poke Helios full of holes with her spear. The Sun Titan continuously tried and failed to woo the young goddess. The only thing he was successful in was pushing Hera's buttons and causing her infamous temper to spike. For once, she would have to thank the Sun Titan for his efforts, despite him being none the wiser. With Olympus out of her line of sight, she took to the earth and walked with no clear path on her mind. The world was vast, and she had yet to see the wonders that Mother Earth provided them in plenty. After the great shift from Gaea at the end of the Titanomachy, much of the known world had changed. A new world was ready to be explored, with mountains unclimbed and forests untouched. She remembered watching as the world Earth began to change, and she couldn't deny a small part of her was excited at the new prospects she could examine. One day, perhaps she could say with certainty that the goddess of the hearth had walked the earth corner to corner. When would that be? She didn't know. She only had an eternity to find out. She hummed to herself as she walked. Away from Olympus, she trailed the edge of the yet-to-be-named middle continent that rested on Gaea's surface. The world had become so different. It was odd to think it was the same one her father once ruled. And what's that? There was a soft glow coming from in front of her, 100 meters away by a cliff face. She was familiar with the type of glow cast. Spying shades of orange and yellow, it was clear someone had a fire going. Who could it be? She wondered. She didn't sense the divine aura from her kin. Deciding to investigate, Hestia walked towards the faint glow with trepidation. Though there was no divine aura, that didn't mean she didn't need to have her guard up. There was an abundance of creatures that inhabited the world. Lacking a divine aura didn't squander their potential for being lethal and dangerous. Although she wasn't a fighter like her brothers and sisters, it didn't mean she was defenseless. As the goddess of the hearth, she possessed divine authority over the fire in a way her siblings could only hope to have. It was comparable to Zeus with lightning or Poseidon with water. Though her 2 younger brothers possessed a great deal more in terms of power, her advantage was her advanced control in comparison. In a short moment, she was near her target. She stood silent in the brush of some trees, keeping out of sight as a figure sat beside a campfire. The person sat on a log, with his body leaning forward with hands clasped together. His back was facing her, though she could see blonde hair covering his head. It was rather long, with bangs framing his face on both sides and reaching past his chin. He dressed in tattered clothes covered in rips and tears. She frowned. It didn't look like any kind of chitin she'd seen before. She hid behind a tree. She'd never seen this person before. Is he a human? That should be impossible. Humanity, or at least the first generation of humanity, was no more. The Golden Generation, as some referred to them, perished in the Great Shift near the end of the war. When the single landmass that made up the world began to shift and change, the gods and titans watched as the world was forced to change. The other pantheons throughout the world, like the Norse and the Egyptians, could do nothing but watch. Despite the history that came with each pantheon, Gaia was the first. No matter how hard each pantheon tried to dismiss it, Gaia spared no one. Her creations were taken out of the world by the very person that breathed life into them centuries ago. Why it happened, no one knew. Gaia had been in a constant state of slumber for centuries, ever since the Titans were given the reins over the kingdom. Her consciousness periodically acted, despite remaining asleep, such as when she shielded Zeus from the Titans and allowed him to grow and attain his strength. The changing of the continent had been without warning, and no one could do anything but get out of the way. When Gaia chose to alter the world, she did so. The choice belonged to no one but the Earth Mother. To see a survivor after all this time was a surprise. "I know you're there." She almost jumped when she heard the voice. It was low and soft, but she heard it as clear as day. The figure was a he, and he hadn't turned around. His back was still facing her. "I won't hurt you. I just don't like people spying on me," he said again, unclasping his hands and making a motion to the other side of the fire. Another log sat against the earth. If you'd come any later, that log would be getting used as firewood, unless you prefer to sit on the ground. She didn't move at first. Hesitation lingered on her face, though she did peek out from behind the tree, letting the glow of the fire wash over her face. Extending her hand, the man finally moved when a stream of fire shot through the air and curled into Hestia's palm. It moved and danced between her fingers like water, moving around rocks in a river. She didn't want to come across as hostile since the man next to the fire hadn't done anything to warrant it, but she needed him to know that despite her appearance, she wasn't defenseless. She may have been a pacifist by nature, but that by no means meant she was incapable of protecting herself. Numerous members of the Titan forces could attest to that. "You have fine control over the flames," he replied, with Hestia getting a good look at the man's blue eyes. "I won't harm you. I have no reason to do so." She detected no hint of deception in his words. Walking out from the woods, she walked across the campsite, her brown eyes keeping watching him. She felt his gaze on her as she sat on the log, brushing down the fabric across her knee. She saw no weapons visible on his person. "Who are you?" He looked back at the fire, and Hestia could see the reflective glow in his eyes. "No one special," he admitted, "just a man who's grown tired of the world." His eyes were sad and tired. He looked like he hadn't got a wink of sleep in days or weeks. "You're from the Golden Generation, aren't you?" she asked. She tried not to react when he nodded his head. He didn't appear bothered by her statement. "I am. Very astute of you. How are you still alive? We couldn't sense any living member of the Golden Generation after the continent broke apart. We assumed you all perished." They searched for as long as they could for any survivors before returning to close off the war. "No, only I remain," he stated before adding, "We? You mean your divine brethren?" Again, she didn't show her surprise. "Yes, you know us." "I do," he admitted. "At least I've heard of you." "The Olympians? The one that fought and defeated the Titans?" Hearing the question in his words, Hestia nodded. "I'm glad your family won. I think most in the world are glad we won. The Titans were responsible for a lot of the world's problems, with my father spearheading them. With them gone, I can only hope my siblings and I can bring about a change for the better." She heard him hum, watched him nod his head before looking her way again. This time she got a good look at his face. He was still a man in his youth and appearance, with the strangest markings on his cheeks. They reminded her of the whiskers from her mother's pair of lions. His hair even resembled a mane like one, too. She remembered observing members of the Golden Generation in the early days of her release from her father's stomach. She'd been so curious to discover more about the world they lived that she spent weeks just watching and learning. The mortals in the world were bizarre and wore clothing vastly different from their own. He didn't seem dangerous. Admittedly, looks could be deceiving. Looking at Hera and Demeter, one would not think the two were warriors until you saw Demeter wield a sword and Hera a spear. Many of their foes made the mistake of looking down on them and paid the price. Well, I wish you luck. Hopefully, you'll do better than your predecessors. I hope that too. She could only hope Zeus didn't fall the same way Kronos did. Their father didn't raise the bar to a high standard. So, what brings one such as yourself out to the middle of nowhere? Taking some time to myself. I love my siblings, but they could be a bit much sometimes. Zeus and Poseidon, in particular, could be very loud and boisterous. Hades could be very glum, and it tended to be infectious. Hera had a temper, and Demeter was very clingy. Each one had their personality quirk. I enjoy the quieter moments. An understanding look appeared on his face. Well, don't let me keep you. Thank you for stopping to talk with me, even if it was brief. Have a good night, he replied, turning away from Hestia and returning his gaze to the fire. It didn't sound dismissive to Hestia. It was more like he wanted to be left alone, despite Hestia getting the sense he wanted the opposite. There's no rush. Her words made him look back again. I only just got here, and I wouldn't mind the company. A lone eyebrow rose. I thought you wanted to be alone. I wanted to get away from my family for one night, which I've done. Plus, you look like you could use the company. His expression didn't change from her words. You don't know me. I don't, though we could change that. She said back, I'm Hestia. Since you know my name, perhaps I could learn yours. He looked at her for a few moments, as if having a silent debate in his mind. Naruto. My name is Naruto. A pleased look wove onto her face. It's nice to meet you, Naruto. For the first time since she sat down, the edges of his lips edged up. You too, Hestia. Present standing in the doorway to the guest room Talia was sleeping in, Naruto watched as his old friend took a spot on the bed next to the sleeping girl, smoothing down her dress as she sat down. Dressed in casual mortal wear, the goddess of the hearth gently reached over and swept her fingers through Talia's dark locks. The girl didn't stir. Instead, the warmth coming from Hestia's palm seemed to comfort the little girl, with the goddess watching as she snuggled herself into a tight ball with the covers wrapping around her like a cocoon. A gentle hum came from her throat, and her lips curved into a smile. Talia was a cute one. Being a former member of the Major 12 Olympians, the eldest daughter of the Titan King had more time than her siblings to watch over the children spawned from her immortal family. Due to her lighter schedule compared to Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, her younger brothers often sought her out and called favors on her to keep an eye on the children with their ichor running in their veins. Talia's existence hadn't been a surprise to Hestia. She loved Zeus, but he was too easily led astray from his marriage with Hera. His wandering eyes and hands hadn't settled with growing age, despite being married to one of the most beautiful goddesses in existence. One woman never seemed to be enough for Zeus. The same could be said for her other brothers, though not to the same extreme. Poseidon was much like his younger brother, though he could be picky and didn't try to pick up the first pretty woman that came his way. For Hades, it was companionship to fill the void until Persephone rejoined him in the underworld. A low laugh escaped her lips, gaining Naruto's attention. What is it? Hestia shook her head, making the dark curls of her hair bounce in the air. It's nothing. I've just never seen one of my brother's children have freckles before. Really? None of the other few hundred kids had freckles. I think it's more like 1,000 when it comes to Zeus. She chirped back, a finger delicately tracing over Talia's face, but no. None of them had a splash of freckles across their nose and cheeks before. She has his traditional features, like his blue eyes and dark hair. I can feel the ozone coming off like a vibration in the air. She'll be a strong one if she makes it to adulthood. If. It was a very big if. There was no guarantee any demigod could make it out of their teens, or even their preteen life. As the blonde already knew, monsters were attracted to demigods like a moth to a flame. The moment a demigod with a strong enough aura or the scent entered their senses, they took after them. It was like blood in the water, sending a shark into a frenzy. In the last couple of centuries, I've been keeping an eye on my brother's children from time to time, she told him, though it is always possible a few slipped through the cracks. Even I have a hard time keeping track of my brother's infidelities. I remember you saying, he replied, watching with a small smile as Hestia interacted with Talia. Technically, Hestia was Talia's aunt and wasn't surprised to find out she had been keeping an eye on her when she could spare it. You keep an eye on Talia often, from time to time. For the most part, little Talia has been happy enough, though the mother troubled me from the onset. She turned her head. If Talia is here and Beryl is not, would she choose to walk away from her child? She has, he confirmed, and saw the disappointment and sadness laze through Hestia's features. Your brother sure knows how to pick them. Beryl showed no remorse or love for her daughter. All she cared about was the fame and riches robbed from her by Talia's existence. He shook his head in disappointment. I haven't met such a selfish person like that in some time. Sadly, Beryl Grace is not the first mortal parent to abandon their demigod child, nor will she be the last. The gods in my family, as well as the goddesses, don't have the best track record when it comes to the mortals they bring to their beds. She returned her gaze to Talia. She looked so innocent and uncaring of the future that now sat in front of her. All Hestia could do was hope Morpheus was giving the girl pleasant dreams. She's a cute one. A low laugh came from Naruto. She is cheeky as well. Sounds like you got to know her today. He shrugged. Someone had to keep an eye on her today. A monster was following them, but I got rid of it before bringing them here. Didn't think I needed any more complications today. Tucking a strand of Talia's dark hair away from her face and behind her ear, Hestia quietly stood up from the bed. She made sure the girl was well covered by the sheets before moving away. Let's leave her to sleep. I bet today has been a long one for the poor dear. Both Naruto and Hestia left the room, with Naruto silently pulling the door until a 3-inch gap remained. Together, the pair returned downstairs, with Naruto leading Hestia into the living room. The goddess took the spot on the armchair next to the couch and placed a cushion behind her back. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in her old friend's new home. Despite its size, Naruto had done well at making his home feel welcoming. In particular, Hestia eyed up the fireplace that sat in the center of the wall. The perks of having a friend whose domain was the home. She may have given him a few tips in the past on how to make one's home feel like an extension of themselves. For Naruto home, it was a place that made you feel safe. It perfectly summed the blonde up. Would you like the usual? He asked, standing in the doorway and watching Hestia scanning over the room. Yes, please. And why don't we make use of the fireplace as well? Coming right up. Sitting in peace for 10 minutes while Naruto whipped something up for them, Hestia took the chance to move herself to the floor in front of the fireplace. Conjuring a blanket, Hestia tucked her legs to the side while her poker appeared in her hand. Gently, she stoked the flames. It wasn't long before Naruto rejoined her, carrying a small tray in his hands. You've made yourself at home, he commented, lowering himself down until he was sitting on his backside with his legs tucked against him. He picked up a teacup and saucer and guided it over to Hestia, who happily took it from him. Your usual. 1 apple and elderberry tea with a tiny splash of honey. Thank you. Bringing the drink up to her mouth, Hestia sighed in delight at the fruit punch that hit her sense of taste. Delicious. I see your tea-making skills are still up to par. Well, when you live in Japan for as long as I did, making tea becomes a required skill. People think Brits drink a lot of tea. They've never been to Japan and visited a tea ceremony. He spent a long time in the East, in particular, Japan. Japanese culture was the one that resembled his old home the most, and being around their towns and cities in the early days helped him to feel like he gained it back in a small way. Plus, Hinata would never forgive me if I forgot all her lessons in tea making. The s'mores. A snort broke from Naruto, before lifting the plate of esmores from the tray and handing them over to Hestia. They weren't anything fancy, but they would do. All you needed was graham crackers, marshmallows, and some chocolate, and in return, you'd have a very pleased hearth goddess. Watching her conjure a small poker like the one she created earlier, she stuck 2 s'mores on the end of each and handed one over to the blonde. "You have a lovely home," Hestia told him, as the pair held their sweet treats over the flames. "I'm sorry I haven't come to visit you sooner. I was planning to visit during the first months, but things at home got in the way. That's okay. I had a feeling you'd come calling at some point, so I kept an eye out for you most days." He let out a low chuckle. "I had a feeling that members of your family would visit the den at some point since I'm in New York, but I didn't think some of them would become some of my best customers." Smiling, Hestia replied, "I hear Artemis and Athena have both become regulars and visit you nearly every week." "Oh yeah, Athena is easy to cater to. Artemis, though," he muttered before letting out another low chuckle. "That stomach of hers doesn't seem to have a bottom. She's like me when it comes to ramen, and I know how challenging I could be with my appetite. They always rave about you." It was surprising to hear my 2 nieces complimenting a mortal man of all things. Athena is one thing, but Artemis is another. Her mouth formed into a smirk. "I hear you've gained Aphrodite's attention as well." A groan escaped from his lips. "Don't start with that. That woman," he muttered, his head drooping. "I've been alive a long time, Hestia, and I've never met someone who's so blatant about those kinds of desires. She might as well just hold up a sign that says, 'Hey, come over here and do me.'" A finger flicked his ear, causing him to wince. "Don't be so crass." The goddess had never been one for rude language. The blonde blew a raspberry Hestia's way. "I don't hear you disagreeing. Aphrodite has always been a bit of a character, even by Olympian standards. That doesn't make her any less a friend and a member of my family. I still don't hear you saying otherwise." Hestia huffed and rotated her s'more over the fire. "She could be a handful, and that's all I'm saying." "A handful?" "Yeah, I guess that's one way of putting it." He brought up his drink, taking a good long swig of the hot substance before following up with, "Then there's that nephew of yours, and the little show he was putting on in my restrooms." He heard a sigh from the goddess. "Let me guess. Apollo? That boy is as bad as his father. Worse at times. He's Zeus's son, all right. Never any doubt about that." Hestia commented. She heard about Apollo's little incident from the Olympian gossip grapevine. Nymphs could be the worst gossip, and when the goddess of love was involved, then nothing stayed a secret for long. No matter where in the world an embarrassing event took place, it always ended up coming back to Olympus. Hephaestus had even made a side hobby with Olympus TV. His cameras were everywhere, ready and waiting. Naruto hummed in amusement. "I wonder when he'll be popping in for a visit." "Oh, I don't think you'll see him anytime soon," she admitted, her eyes flickering between brown eyes and flames. "Hephaestus prefers to keep to himself. He's never been a sociable person the same way his brothers are. I think that's why most of the goddesses in my family prefer to be around him than the likes of Apollo or Ares." "Everyone except Aphrodite," Naruto commented. "Everyone except Aphrodite," Hestia confirmed, before giving him a funny look. Strange how he looped back around to her. "Hey, you brought her up." Naruto held up his hands, before letting out a low chuckle. It wasn't long before Hestia was chuckling along with him. "It's good to see you again, Hestia." "It's good to see you too, my old friend," she replied, looking at Naruto fondly. Their friendship spanned millennia. It could have been the longest-lasting friendship in history for all they knew. For Hestia, Naruto provided her with a reprieve from the family she cherished so much. When she needed time away, she visited him in whatever land he chose to make his temporary home. She would stay for a few weeks, sometimes even months, catching up and going off on little adventures of their own. As she quickly came to realize, Naruto had this uncanny ability to draw the most peculiar people towards him, akin to a magnet. Oh, the people they met and the things they saw would make her siblings green with envy. He was an escape, and one of the few from outside of her family that she cherished dearly. For Naruto, it was the friend he needed during the most agonizing time in his life. Without Hestia by his side, he wouldn't have been able to escape the hole of loneliness and despair he found himself trapped within. You found yourself in quite the predicament. I'd say I'm surprised, but we both know I'd be lying. Yeah, it's been a crazy day, Naruto confirmed, taking his s'more out of the fire and gently blowing on it. I didn't think when I woke up this morning I'd be housing an abandoned demigod. Said demigod also happens to be your niece and your brother's daughter. A serious look crossed Naruto's face. Tell it to me straight, Hestia. What options does Talia have? Hestia mimicked his actions with her own s'more, gently cooling it down with her breath. At this moment in time, she started, taking a small bite from her s'more and licking the corners of her lips. She has 3 options that I can see. 3? All right, then let's hear them. The first option is the least likely to work, so let's get out of the way. The first choice is to take Talia back to her mother in California. She watched as Naruto's face morphed into a grimace. I can see you don't favor that idea. Not in the slightest. If Talia gets sent back to Beryl, it will only spur her to do it again. Next time, she could get left with someone who wants to harm Talia rather than help her. It was luck Beryl and Talia stumbled into the Fox's Denver. Any other establishment would have called Child Protective Services, and Talia would have found herself in the foster system where anyone could get to her. She'd be a target for monsters, inhuman, and human. I think we'll pass on option 1. Agreed. Option 2. Well, it's more favorable, though it still has concerns. I contact Chiron and inform him I'm bringing Talia to Camp Half-Blood. The likelihood of Talia joining the camp has always been high since her birth, though not until she was older. Kids as young as Talia don't typically go there unless there's no other choice. Kids who have no homes and have been abandoned by their parents, much like the situation she's currently in. Naruto nodded, taking a bite from his s'more. Camp Half-Blood. Of course, he was aware of the existence of the camp. Located on Long Island, Camp Half-Blood was one of the few places in the world that acted as a haven for the demigods. Somewhere where they didn't need to look over their shoulders every 5 minutes, and where they could meet people like themselves and build real relationships. He never seen it, but Hestia told him a few stories about some of the people that went there. He met a fair few of them as well, though none were aware of his real identity. Frederick Bartholdi, Harriet Tubman, Amelia Earhart, William Shakespeare, just to name a few. It was a place where kids like Talia could learn to control whatever gifts they inherited from their godly parent and learn how to fight. If he was honest with himself, though Camp Half-Blood sounded ideal, he didn't like the idea of children as young as Talia learning how to wield a sword and fight monsters. The people of today weren't like the people from past cultures. They certainly weren't like the people of his era. The two were like night and day. Teaching children to fight and kill at such a young age could have harmful consequences on how said children grew up in the world. You only had to look at Kakashi or Itachi to see the lasting effect it had on them. There was a reason Old Man, 3rd Hokage, ensured no genin left the Ninja Academy any younger than 12 after the events of the Uchiha Massacre. Children that young shouldn't have to worry about wielding a sword. They shouldn't have to go to bed feeling pleased that they managed to survive one more day, before turning fearful about what the next day might bring. Camp Half-Blood, though would be a place Talia would eventually have to visit when she inevitably embraced her heritage, didn't feel like the right fit for someone barely out of diapers. It's better than the first option. Though she's a bit young to learn how to kill monsters, he mumbled before asking, "What's the third option?" Finishing another bite from her s'more, Hestia fluttered her eyelashes. "Are you sure you want to hear it?" Naruto gave her a look. Fine. The third option is she stays here with you. You raise her, protect her, and teach her how to defend herself when the time comes. Oh, is that all? Naruto feigned surprise. You don't ask for much, do you? It's not like you haven't done it before. That was a long time ago, he replied, looking away. A pretty little blonde girl with big blue eyes flashed across his mind. She was a cute little thing, though she didn't stay that way. She grew up and became a formidable warrior in her own right. She was more likely to run a spear through you if you earned her ire, 500 years ago. Not to mention, she wasn't even a demigod from the Greek pantheon. She was from the Norse. I know you guys don't like to mingle. He waved his hands in the air. A demigod's a demigod, no matter where they're from. Just like monsters are still monsters, no matter what form they take, Hestia reminded him. What was her name again? Naruto turned his head her way. Ganilla. Ah, yes, Hestia nodded. I remember. She was a cute one if I remember right, and a daughter of thunder, much like Talia is. Thor was never more annoying than he was while Ganilla was under my care. He used visiting her as an excuse to pick a fight. Naruto sighed and fell backwards until he was looking up at the ceiling. Could he look after another demigod again? I don't know, Hestia. Hestia giggled, and soon found herself staring up at the ceiling with her blonde best friend. Would it be that bad? I don't know. Maybe. His thoughts turned to all the times his customers would visit the fox's den with their kids. They gravitated to him, and vice versa. He would pull silly faces at them and make them food that wasn't even on the menu if it's what they wanted. It never bothered the parents, simply because it was keeping the kids happy. He liked to think it all stemmed back to him being a father. He loved being a father when Boruto and Himawari were born, despite how terrifying it was. When he took Ganilla in, it was because he saw a little girl who needed love and attention. He treated her like she was his own. It helped that he got on with her godly father, despite his unnatural love for fighting and causing a mess. However, another reason was that he didn't want children growing up the same way he did. Alone and without a family by your side, I made it a point not to reveal myself to the world unless necessary. I keep myself to myself because it's easier that way. Meeting you had been a happy accident, one that I'll never regret. Meeting Norse gods was the same, despite some of them trying to poke me full of holes. He sighed and rested the back of his head on the carpet. I'm tired, Hestia. I miss home. I miss my family. I shouldn't be here. His words came out as a whisper, but Hestia had heard him. Reaching over with a free hand, she waved her fingers through his and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She pops up every now and again, you know. More so recently, since I moved to New York. She has this habit of appearing in my mind whenever things seem to be going well. Do you think she's waking up? A lace of fear etched into Hestia's voice. To her relief, Naruto shook his head. He shook his head. She stirs from time to time, but not since the 1940s have I felt it. I'd know if she's awake. He put down the rod holding the half-eaten s'more and patted his chest. I'd feel it if I did. That woman and I have linked thanks to the curse she put on me. Many would see immortality as a gift. She didn't intend it to be a gift. She never did. His gaze hardened up at the ceiling. I wouldn't give her what she wanted, so she took everything from me. He turned and looked at Hestia, his eyes shifting from anger and his sadness. Taking Ganilla into my care was one thing. When she died, Odin turned her into a Valkyrie. When Talia dies, she goes to the underworld, and I never see her again. I'm inviting more pain into my life, and there's enough in there as it is. Hestia rolled onto her side. True, but would you turn away a child in need of help? That's not the Naruto I know. Despite his words, Hestia knew her friend too well. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He couldn't help himself when it came to helping people. It was like he was hardwired that way. Something inside him wouldn't allow him to walk away from a situation where he could make a difference. Somewhere he could turn a negative into a positive. I think that's what people use to call my hero complex. I can't help but meddle, even when everyone else avoids it. He shook his head and laughed at himself. A good quality to have. Shame more people don't have it. I guess. He let out another sigh, before pushing himself back into a sitting position. Hestia quickly joined him, watching as the cogs in his mind started turning. She could tell he was always pondering over the idea, letting it sink in, picturing the potential outcomes of letting a demigod of Talia's caliber remain with him. I'd have to come public to your family if I do this, he said, to your brother at the very least. He should know where she is, even if he doesn't pay her the attention he should. He didn't need another thunder god. Try to pick a fight with him. One was enough. Zeus shouldn't be an issue. Despite his reputation when it comes to his daughters, he does develop soft spots for them, Hestia revealed, thinking of all the times Zeus coddled and spoiled Artemis and Athena when they were young goddesses. Luckily, next month is June. Zeus will be celebrating his anniversary to Hera, which will put him in a positive mood. How positive? So positive that it's the only time in the year that the gods can request practically anything from him within reason, and he'll say yes. It was hilarious to watch, and Hestia found herself in a fit of giggles whenever she saw the queue of immortals lining up outside of Zeus's temple, taking the virginity of his beautiful and faithful wife every year thanks to Hera's sacred bath within her temple always puts a spring in his step. Once she saw him dancing along the streets of Olympus because he was in such a good mood. There's no better time. I'll bring him to the Fox's Den in June. I'll let you know the date beforehand. He ran a hand over his face and pinched the bridge of his nose. One little detail I think you're missing. Oh, your sister. A knowing look ran over his face as he stared at Hestia. Could she become a problem in the future? The stories around Hera and the demigod children of her husband were infamous. Any child born from a union between the king of the gods and a mortal woman would find themselves at the mercy of the enraged queen, and their lives rarely ended on a positive note. My sister is aware of Talia's existence. So far, she's left her alone. Whether that's because Zeus threatened action if Hera tried anything, or she's playing a long game, I can't say. Hestia explained. In the past, her decisions towards Zeus's demigod children have been the result of spontaneous decision-making. Hera's dream is to have the perfect family, and children of Zeus that don't come from her ruin that image. It took her a long time to accept Zeus's Olympian children since they weren't going anywhere. Since demigods have mortal lifespans, actions against them only have temporary consequences. She never agreed with her sister's actions in the past. Though she could understand Hera felt betrayed, and it was never easy to watch her sister's heartbreak over and over again by constant infidelity, her actions towards demigods couldn't be justified in her eyes. Zeus was the one at fault, not the child. If Hera wanted to take her anger out on someone, then it should have been her husband. However, as would always happen, Hera would kick him out of their marriage bed for a while, but Zeus would sweet-talk his way back into Hera's good graces. It was a cycle that continued for millennia, and knowing them as she did, it wasn't going to stop anytime soon. It was the definition of a dysfunctional marriage. It was no wonder the aspect of it became riddled with divorce. How could the domain thrive when the goddess who watched over it was in a one-sided marriage of their own? Naruto let out a low hum and sensed the aura of the little girl sleeping upstairs. So innocent and small. What are you thinking? Hestia asked, recognizing the look on his face. He was in deep thought, his fingers tapping against his knee. It was a little sign she picked up over the years when he was thinking about something. His fingers couldn't keep still. I understand why your sister acts out, he replied, garnering Hestia's attention. I think we all would be if we married him. She's angry and frustrated. She's at the end of her rope, as it were. I remember you saying a long time ago that she wanted nothing more than the picture-perfect family. No offense to your sister, but she's not going to have that with Zeus. Many of us have told her, but she chooses to ignore our advice. Hera was incredibly stubborn, and her temper could go unmatched when pushed the wrong way. Even Zeus was hesitant to deal with his wife when she was angry beyond words. Since marriage is her domain, she doesn't take advice well on the subject. The blonde nodded. I sympathize with her, but that's no excuse to take that frustration out on children, even if they're her unfaithful husband's children. Adults harming children didn't sit well with him. Gods and goddesses who thought they could mess with children, they would have a rude awakening with him around. I'll make this blunt, Hestia. He had a confident look on his face, whether it's your sister or someone else. I pity any god from any pantheon that comes to MY doorstep looking to pick a fight, whether it's with me or it's with Talia. They'll be on a one-way trip to whatever version of hell you gods have. So, does that mean the girl can stay? Hestia asked, sounding hopeful. With a tired nod, Naruto agreed. Yeah, I guess she can stay. As you said, it's her best option. Hestia clapped her hands together. Wonderful news. I think this is the best alternative. She didn't need to wonder if Talia was going to be happy here. She knew in her heart that Naruto would provide a warm and loving home for her little niece. He might be rusty when it comes to raising a child as young as Talia, but if anyone could manage, it was him. Children of Zeus could be notoriously hard to raise, and often inherited some of her brother's less than desirable traits. However, those children didn't have a knucklehead like Naruto raising them. She was sure as Talia grew up, she'd realize there was little she could get away with. "Don't think you're getting out this scot-free," Naruto replied and watched Hestia freeze mid-clap. "If you think I'm doing this alone, then you've got another thing coming." She wasn't sure she was going to like this. "What do you mean?" "I'll look after Talia on one condition." He held up a finger. "What's the condition?" she asked, looking at him suspiciously. He leaned in, a tired grin forming on his face. "You have to help me raise her. I think it's time Talia got to know her wonderful Auntie Hestia." "What?" Hestia gasped, looking like someone who stuck their finger in a plug socket. "What do you mean?" "I can't do that." "Sure you can. It's easy. I mean, you've seen your sisters raise their kids, so you know what not to do." He shrugged and stood up. "You can't tell me you've never wondered what it would be like to raise a child of your own." "You know I haven't." Hestia stood up and scowled at him. She would have appeared threatening if her cheeks didn't puff up when she got mad. She looked like an angry chipmunk who had her nuts stolen from her. "I swore I would never have children of my own. I'm not maternal. I don't have that vibe. Naruto snorted. "You know what I mean? Technically, you're not having kids in the traditional sense. You're merely helping me raise Talia." He said again, "I'm not asking you to do the whole mom act. I'm saying be her Auntie Hestia and build a relationship with her. Talia should have a female presence in her life. And who better than Miss Goody Two-Shoes, Hestia? We're not supposed to be present in the lives of demigod children." He shrugged. "Your brother wasn't supposed to have any more demigods. Look how well that turned out. Besides, when was the last time you bent the rules a little?" "I don't bend any rules." He snorted. "What was that for?" A hand came up to his mouth, and he coughed out 1969. Hestia's eyes went wide and pointed the finger at him again. "You promised we would not talk about that. I recall we were at Woodstock. I'm warning you." I still remember the smile on your face as you crowd surfed from one corner to the other. The who were performing, he grinned before feeling a weight jump on his back and a small fist begin bopping him on the head. "Ow, you crazy goddess. Get off. You said you would never mention that day again." My fingers were crossed. "Gah." His yelps soon turned into chuckles. Eventually, he was able to slide the annoyed goddess off his back and placed her back on her 2 feet. She looked less than happy, but he knew she wouldn't do anything to hurt him. It wasn't Hestia's nature to hurt. It was her nature to soothe. "Come on, Hestia." His voice turned low. "I'm not asking you to make this girl your daughter or anything like that. All I'm asking is for you to be a positive female presence in her life. I dread to think about what kind of presence Beryl had in her young life." His hand came up and rested on her shoulder. If it was anyone else, Hestia might have scolded their palm. "Just be the cool, and I know you can be. A good influence." His eyes softened. "For me?" Now it was Hestia's turn to soften. It took a few moments, but when her shoulders dropped, he knew he had her. It wasn't like Hestia to turn away from someone who needed help. They were much the same in that regard. Naruto rarely asked for favors, and Hades knew the blonde had helped her out a time or two. It wasn't like she was going to be solely responsible for the girl. She would be helping out and being the cool aunt, as the blonde stated. She sighed. "Fine. Really? Yes. For you, Naruto. Only for you." In typical Naruto fashion, Hestia found herself swept up in a tight hug, breaking her annoyed visage and turned her expression back into a smile. "Have I ever told you you're amazing, Hestia?" "Oh, once or twice, though it never hurts to hear it." She patted him on the back. "Come on, we don't want our drinks getting cold. I still have room left for another s'more, or 2. "Of course. You can have all the s'mores you like." Hestia giggled. "I'll hold you to that." Part 12 Underworld, come on. "We need to head back before your father begins to notice our absence," Hecate replied, halting and turning around to look at Melano. The goddess of ghosts stood in the middle of the path, watching as the gates that housed the old ones came to close. "Melano, are you listening?" "I know." Her reply came out as little more than a whisper. "I'm just wrapping my head around everything that happened today. It's a lot to take in." The amount of information she received about the mysterious blonde was overwhelming. On the one hand, She was grateful she was able to speak to the people that knew him best. His wife, his children, his parents, everyone who could tell him about the different aspects of his life, the ups and the downs, his childhood, which led into his teenage years, and then into adulthood. She felt she might know the man better than himself. His parents couldn't help much given they died young and on the day he was born, but his wife, Hinata, had been a treasure trove of knowledge. They were understandably suspicious at first, but steadily opened up when they realized she meant no ill will to them or Naruto. Jiraiya, despite his initial friendliness, and the woman with the giant melons hadn't spoken much. Most of the time they watched and listened, their gaze locked on the pair of goddesses like a homing beacon. Tsunade had pitched in when needed, and Melano couldn't help but feel the maternal worry that came off the blonde woman. Given Kushina had died the day Naruto was born, Melano would hazard a guess that Tsunade had taken it upon herself to play the maternal role in his life. She mentioned how she once had to tie him to a chair and ordered a woman named Shizen to force-feed steamed vegetables into his mouth. When she punched her fist in her other hand, both goddesses had the feeling Tsunade was the kind of a person who enjoyed tough love. "What will you do now?" Melano sighed and scratched the back of her head. "What should she do now?" There was an immortal from the Golden Generation waking amongst modern society, and the gods had no idea he existed. For something to go amiss from her extended family on Olympus and remain out of the sight from the gaze of Zeus was laughable. Her father's brother was suspicious of anything that didn't belong, especially when they had power. Whether he had power along with his immortality was a question mark. This power called chakra that the old souls could wield sounded like something out of a storybook, and yet the way they described it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Mortals who could use that type of power felt wrong. Like the everyday person wouldn't be able to handle having that kind of power at their disposal. It was no wonder the old souls lived in a time of constant bloodshed and espionage, where nations and people were overflowing with hubris and greed. If people of today could use chakra, then she could picture the wrathful Earth Mother awaking from her slumber to punish humanity once again. "I don't know," Melano muttered. She turned around and caught up with Hecate. Instead of walking along the olden path again, the bodies of the two goddesses began to light up. In the blink of an eye, the pair disappeared from the gates and reappeared within the palace of Hades. They stood in Melano's quarters, with Hecate watching as Melano sundered over to the foot of her bed and promptly dropped herself on top of it with all the grace of a newborn duckling. "I should tell my father." That wasn't surprising. Given all but one of the old souls were within his realm, the god of the underworld would want to know how one of the old ones wasn't claimed by his domain. "And what do you think Hades will do?" Hecate asked. "It's hard to say. There's still a couple of months until Mother comes home, so his mood will be gloomy at best." The queen of the underworld was one of the few people who could bring Hades out his shell and bring down the iron walls Hades put around himself. She always had the most success, followed closely by the mother of the elder gods. "I'd tell her first before I'd tell father." She's always been good at cooling down his temper. Hecate hummed and crossed her arms. Hades has never been the type to act first and ask questions later. That's always been Zeus and occasionally Poseidon. Your father is far more patient than either of them. He waits and watches before deciding if he needs to act. I think you give him far too much credit. I think you don't give him enough. Melano raised an eyebrow. "Well then, what do you think I should do with this information?" she asked. Despite being the daughter of the god of the underworld, Hecate had known him much longer. She was a good judge of character. It was why she spent so much time in the underworld. "I think you should go to Hades and fill him in on what's happened today. He won't like getting left out of the loop," Hecate replied, pulling a face and tapping her chin. "I can't help but wonder what he would do." The goddess of ghosts scoffed and gave a look of disbelief to the older immortal. "Seriously?" To her surprise, the goddess of magic shrugged. "Honestly, it's up to you what you want to do with the information you acquired today. I was along for the ride, and you didn't disappoint. However, I think this is where I'm going to jump off from the train." A sly smirk graced the face of the most mysterious goddess of the Greek pantheon. Melano could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Was she bailing? After making such a fuss earlier in the day, You can't be serious. Hecate had appeared so interested and curious about finding out the secrets of the mysterious blonde, despite having never met him. She could be so flighty at the most unhelpful times. You're leaving? After everything we've heard today, I'm deadly serious. Today was a nice change of pace, but I think I'm ready to go back to my daily routine. Being all mysterious and aloof. I have a reputation to uphold after all. Hecate spun around, and Melano could sense the energy building up inside of her. She was about to teleport again, but gave Mano one final piece of advice. Don't be a pansy, Melano. Go to your father and see what happens. Maybe he'll surprise you. Like the mist she controlled, she vanished, leaving Melano alone with her thoughts. I will never understand that woman. She muttered to herself, staring at the spot where Hecate previously stood, before falling back onto the bed. She now had a decision to make. Did she tell her father, or does she continue down the road alone? The goddess of magic wasn't as keen as she began to hope, leaving her wondering if she should have left the mystery of Naruto Uzumaki alone. Was she too far down the rabbit hole, or was there time to dig her way out? She had a lot of thinking to do. Days later, the fox's den telling a little girl that her mother had abandoned her on the doorstep of a stranger was not an experience Naruto looked forward to. He expected plenty of tears and wailing, maybe some small objects getting thrown his way. There wasn't much a 4-year-old could do to hurt him, except for breaking his tender heart with cuteness. Despite that, in terms of breaking the news to the little girl, he thought the ordeal went rather well, all considering. At least, he thought so. It was a boon that Hestia remained with him all through the night, going back and forth on the goings-on in their lives since they last met with one another. Goddesses like Hestia didn't need much sleep compared to mortals, and being a ninja, forced himself to adjust to remaining awake during sensitive and urgent missions. You could ill afford to get caught by a rogue ninja whilst asleep. When the clock struck at 9 o'clock in the morning, he chose to coax his new ward out of her bed with the delightful smell of bacon. The greasy food had the desired effect, and not 5 minutes later, a tired and half-asleep Talia Grace tiptoed into the kitchen. A pillow was still resting in her arms, with half her face obscured as she refused to leave all of the divine warmth of her bed. Both Naruto and Hestia found themselves cooing at the sleepy state of the demigod. How can anyone nod at the image? Good mornings were sent her way, and Naruto soon found himself sitting beside little Talia, with Hestia taking up the other side. Together, they had come up with a story for Talia to hear, one that would ease Talia into the new life she was about to enter. He told her Beryl had woken up late last night when she was still asleep and asked Naruto to look after Talia for her before slipping away. That she was unable to look after Talia anymore and would have to leave her in Naruto's capable hands. There were some half-truths to the story, and he didn't feel it was right to tell her that her mother hated the fact that she was born. That was too cruel to place on someone so young. Some sniffles began to break out as expected, with Naruto placing a comforting hand on the little girl as the information tried to sink in. It was a wonder how much Talia understood at such a young age. He got down on one knee and gently wiped her eyes as the skin beneath the eyes turned a blotchy red, gentle shushing her, and to his mild surprise, he found the little girl shuffling out of her chair and came to rest on his knee, burying her face into his shirt. The looks Hestia gave him was one of amusement at his surprised face before steadily wrapping Talia up in a comforting hug. He couldn't deny, for a moment, he imagined it was Himawari sitting in his arms, her dark hair tickling the skin beneath his chin. He took a few deep breaths before gently tilting her head to face his and gave her the warmest smile he could muster. It had the desired effect, as the little girl gained a twinkle in her eye and the tiniest smile as her new carer shrouded her in love and warmth. Then he introduced her to Hestia. It was safe to say the second they were met, Hestia became Talia's favorite person in the world. How's that? That's very good, though you've still gone out of the lines a little. One here, Hestia said, looking over the page in the coloring book she and Talia were working on together, and 2 more down here. She pointed at the bottom of the page, where the bright green and yellow elephant they spent the last 15 minutes coloring in showing some of the colors going over the black lines. Ah, Talia pouted, her face scrunching up and giving her best attempt at a glare towards the green and yellow elephant. The reaction made Hestia giggle before placing a comforting hand on the top of her dark hair. Don't fret, honey. The elephant still looks wonderful. You can't even tell. You have to lean in very close to see it. See, proving her point, Hestia leaned into the point where her nose was touching the surface of the paper. I guess. The 4-year-old still didn't sound convinced. Can we try another picture? And I'll get it right this time. The goddess of the hearth nodded. Sure, honey. Which one would you like to try? She turned the pages of the book, flicking through as she searched for an animal they hadn't colored in yet. Shall we try and color the lion? Or maybe we could color the alligator. The little girl shook her head. Nah. The sound came out like a sheep bleating, forcing Hestia to bite her lip from busting out a loud laugh. Talia's blue eyes looked through each page for a couple of moments at a time before finally finding one that caught her attention. This one. Hestia looked down at the page and smiled. A fox. Yeah, it looks like Mr. Naruto. The goddess giggled again. Leave it to a child to point out something so funny and ironic. I guess you're right. I think it's the whiskers. She whispered, tapping the page with her finger. Yeah, Talia whispered back, nodding enthusiastically. She fell into a fit of giggles, joining her aunt and laughing together. What are you two giggling about? They heard, looking up from the table to find Naruto standing next to their table. Their table sat in the corner of the room, closest to the counter at the front of the house. The fox's den was half filled on a Saturday, though the blonde found himself busy beyond words earlier in the day. It was only in the last hour where things started to calm down. Talia and Hestia arrived 30 minutes ago, bringing with them a coloring book and a pack of crayons Hestia had bought for her niece a few days ago. By the look on the little girl's face, she was eager to make a start on her new book, though she made sure to give Naruto a big hug when they walked in and cheerily greeted him. The action warmed his heart and made his smile widen before escorting them to a free table. She was settling in nicely. Nothing. Just girl stuff, Hestia replied, and was quickly mimicked by her niece. Yeah, girl stuff. Mr. Naruto, being nosy. He is, isn't he, Talia? Hestia replied, giggling at Talia's words. Naruto was right about her niece. She was very cheeky, but in an endearing way. Chuckling, Naruto didn't press. Instead, he lowered the tray and rested it on the table. All right, be that way. I've got your lunch for you, so pack your crayons away. You could draw some more after you've finished. It surprised him how quickly he fell back into parent mode. Sure, there was some rust. It has been more than 5 centuries since he last cared for a little one. With Ganilla, the little girl tested him for the first couple of weeks. It was the child's way of seeing if this new adult in their life was going to stick around, or if they were going to turn tail and run away. It was the same process when a divorced or widowed parent brought home their new significant other. Oh, the daughter of Thor has tested him. His patience, his limits, his sanity. After weeks of acting like a tiny tyrant, something finally clicked in their relationship. When she realized he wasn't going anywhere and he was there to stay, the walls disappeared and a very different little girl was left standing before him. Talia didn't need to be told twice. She packed her crayons into a neat pile and closed her coloring book. Settling her plate in front of her, Talia licked her lips. Yummy. Well, I hope so. 1 plate of French toast with strawberries and syrup. Next, he placed a small cup of darkish yellow liquid to the side and 1 freshly squeezed glass of apple juice. Enjoy, Talia. The little girl's eyes lit up. She picked up her cutlery, but stopped when Hestia gently tapped her hand. What do you say? A big smile lit up Talia's face. Thank you, Mr. Naruto. You're very welcome, Talia. He ruffled the top of her head and felt her lean into his touch. You know, you don't always have to call me Mr. Naruto. Just Naruto will be fine. Okay, Mr. Naruto. The blonde chuckled again and left the little girl to eat her lunch. It was a title he was probably going to be stuck with for a while, though he didn't mind. Grabbing the other plate, he settled it down in front of Hestia, who was having French toast and strawberries as well, with the addition of dices of banana. The portion on the plate was larger than Talia's and cut to perfection. Here's your lunch, and here's your drink. A mug of freshly brewed tea took up the spot next to her plate. The distinct scent of strawberry and vanilla wafted through the air, making Hestia hum in delight. Smells delicious. British origin. Japanese. No one makes tea like the East, Naruto replied. How's your morning been? It was good, thank you. We went to the mall, and I'm pleased to say Talia's wardrobe is now full. You won't have to worry about clothes or shoes for a while. Hestia replied, You owe me one. I know. I won't forget. Naruto said back. He'd asked Hestia to help with the wardrobe situation since he was none the wiser on what would be best to get someone like Talia in modern society. He hadn't shopped for clothing for a little girl since Himawari was a little girl, and even then, Hinata had been the one with the eye for such things. Buying clothes for boys was one thing, but buying for a girl wasn't an entirely different matter. Not wanting to get the wardrobe situation wrong, he left it in Hestia's capable hands. This is going to be an adjustment, that's for sure. Hestia smiled, taking a bite of her lunch. I wouldn't worry. As you said, you're rusty, but that rust will wear off eventually. Next time, you can come with us, and I'll show you some pointers. Thanks. I'll be taking you up on that. And when does her new wardrobe arrive? Tomorrow. The guy at the store said it'll arrive in 3 days, and that was 2 days ago. He didn't give me a specific time, except that it will be in the morning. Just means I'll have to leave. He leaned in so Talia didn't hear him, a clone to sign the paperwork and help get it up the stairs. Since Talia was now living with Naruto permanently, the blonde decided to turn the guest room she'd been staying into hers. The little girl had been excited at the prospect of having such a large room. It was twice as big as her previous one, and the bed was much bigger than her old one. Watching the way she would wriggle around in her sleep, her new bed could easily accommodate. They bought new covers and sheets for her, ones that were dark blue and white and comfortable to the point Talia would fall asleep the moment her head touched the fabric. He quickly realized Talia was the type of person who enjoyed having lots of pillows and added a few more for her to enjoy. While they were out, he left some clones behind to give the walls a new lick of paint. All 4 walls were painted light blue, similar to the sky on a sunny day. The carpet was the only part that remained the same. A toy chest had been added, with a few welcoming gifts from himself and Hestia, while a row of stuffed animals of different varieties adorned the top of the chest. Thus far, Talia was in love with her new room. His reward had been the biggest hug the little girl could muster and continued to give him when she saw an opportunity. The last piece he added was a night light that shone star shapes on the walls. Last night, when he stopped by her room to check on her, he found her with her limbs spread out like an eagle, a goofy smile on her face as she slept the night away. I think you've got a customer trying to wave you over, Hestia told him, nodding over to a woman trying to get his attention from across the room. So, I do, he replied, duty calls. Let me know if there's anything else you want for lunch. You too. I'll be back shortly. With that, he continued his day, leaving the aunt and niece duo to their lunch. Okay. The reply from Talia came out muffled, her mouth full of French toast. A slight look of admonishment came off the goddess of the hearth, who flicked her niece's ear. She was always a stickler for manners. She would do the same for her godly nephews and nieces whenever she caught them. Everyone knew to be on their best behavior when in the presence of the goddess of the hearth. Don't speak when your mouth is full, Talia. It's bad manners. Oh, dash, Talia started to say, before getting cut off by the look on her aunt's face. The 4-year-old had enough sense to swallow her food first, before replying, Okay, Annie Hestia. Good girl. What are we doing later, Annie? I'm not sure. I don't have to go home until this evening, so we've got all afternoon. Hestia threw some ideas around, hoping it tickled the fancy of her niece. We could go for a walk in Central Park. There's this lovely ice cream stand we could try if you're good. The weather is very nice today. Apollo must have been in a good mood, and the goddess could only imagine what had put him in one. Or better yet, who? Can I have chocolate ice cream? Of course. I bet chocolate is your favorite, right? It's the best. Talia said back, a moment away from taking another big bite of her French toast. What's your favorite? Annie Hestia? My favorite? Oh, well, I love vanilla. Her answer didn't sit well with Talia, who made a face. What's that face for, huh? What's wrong with vanilla? Vanilla's boring. Boring? She questioned. a smile tugging at her lips again. Yup, it's the most boring ice cream in the whole world. Old people like vanilla. Hestia tried to contain her laughter, but couldn't hold it with her best efforts. Her niece said the funniest things, and she didn't even know it. Technically, she was older than all the mortals currently sat in the fox's den, along with the rest of the block. The only person older was Naruto, who was none the wiser to Talia's little comment as he carried 2 plates of red velvet cake to an older gentleman and his wife. "Then what do you think I should get?" she asked, as her niece was the apparent expert in all things ice cream related. "Chocolate. And what if I don't want chocolate?" Talia pouted, her lips puckered as a thoughtful expression wove onto her face. She got cuter and cuter by the second. Gods, she was beginning to think like Aphrodite. Talia would find herself wrapped up in the goddess of love's arms, being gushed over and spoiled with no end in sight. That wasn't to say Hestia hadn't spent the last few days doing just that on Talia since her arrival into Naruto's life, but the most sensual immortal on Olympus had a habit for taking it too far. Talia's bedroom would be overflowing with stuffed animals and all things cute and fluffy. The little girl would be decked out in nothing but pink dresses whether she liked them or not. "Strawberry, strawberry," Hestia repeated, thinking over the choice. "Well, I do like strawberry. That's my second favorite." "Mine too. Are you sure I can't have vanilla?" "No, even if I say please." Talia shook her head, forcing Hestia to let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, all right then. Have it your way." Talia giggled, and Hestia soon found Talia's arm wrapped around her waist. A pair of bright blue eyes stared up at her with a look of wonder. The hug was a surprise, but not unwelcome, and Hestia soon found herself reciprocating. Wrapping one arm around Talia's shoulder, her hand came up and delicately wove her fingers through her dark locks. "This is nice," she heard Talia whisper. "I like your hugs, Auntie Hestia." "Well, thank you, sweetie. I like your hugs too. Goodness, I've been getting so many hugs over the last couple of days. I feel spoiled." Hestia smiled and watched as Talia's smile widened. Her niece was such a happy child. A demigod that was happy was a rare thing to see, even when they were this young. "I love you, Auntie Hestia." The words flowed out of Talia's mouth easily and would have caught her off guard if she hadn't heard it a few times today already. For Hestia, the last few days with her niece had felt most peculiar. Unlike Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, and Hades, Hestia's had a perfect recollection of the moment Kronos swallowed her whole, forcing her to grow up deep within his stomach. To this day, she could still remember the abyss that was her father's throat, like a pit of despair and cruelty with no end. The screams of her mother when she realized what Kronos was doing haunted her to this day, sending chills across her body. The agony in Rhea's voice had been unbearable. Like something out of nightmare comes to life. She could only imagine what her mother had felt at that moment. To this day, Rhea wouldn't talk about it. The pain was always there. Her husband's greatest betrayals. The moment the man she chose to commit herself with showed his true colors. She had a lot of time to think about the life she wanted to have if she ever escaped her father's stomach. She didn't want to experience the same agony her mother felt. She didn't want to feel the loss of a child and watch as they were ripped away by someone who was supposed to love them. If Hera and Demeter wanted to create life from their bodies, then she would help them through it as an older sister should. However, that choice was not one she wanted for herself. She didn't have the maternal element inside her as they did, and that grew as centuries went by. She didn't want children. She didn't want a husband. She didn't want any of it. She chose to remain an eternal virgin because she saw no value in having those elements in her life. She didn't view herself as maternal, nor did she want a husband to commit herself to. She was happy to be nothing more than a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a friend. She was content with the life she created for herself. She saw no need to add anything new to her life. And then Naruto stepped back in her life, bringing with her this little ball of energy that captured her heart near instantaneously. Talia was like a breath of fresh air. For someone immortal, the days, months, and years started to feel the same. It became repetitive. Even Hestia found herself growing bored in recent years. Naruto was her saving grace during her many visits and never failed to liven everything around him. Talia, she felt, was the same way. They were like two peas in a pod, meant to find one another. Love you too, sweetie. Later that evening, okay, let me see those teeth, Naruto asked, standing in the bathroom opposite Talia's room. Said little girl was standing on a small red pedestal, so she could reach the mirror and watch as she brushed her teeth. No child, no matter what age they were, enjoyed brushing their teeth. It seemed to be universal, no matter what era. Kids just found it to be the biggest chore, second only to tidying their room. Good dental hygiene was key, and no one liked the result of not taking care of your teeth. He would rather be used as a training dummy for students at the Ninja Academy than go to the dentist. Tooth pain was one of the worst sensations imaginable. And if there was one thing he was going to teach Talia while she was under his roof, it was to take good care of her pearly whites. Talia opened her mouth wide in an exaggerated manner. The daughter of Zeus was dressed ready for bed, wearing a set of gray pajamas with a happy-looking cloud on the front, courtesy of Hestia. She scrunched her face at the idea of anything pink. Any piece of clothing Hestia picked out that had a shred of pink on them, Talia immediately shook her head. The 4-year-old didn't like the color one bit. It was a good thing she wasn't a daughter of the goddess of love. Such a mindset on the color pink was almost illegal for a child of the goddess of love. Naruto took a brief look, wearing an exaggerated expression before nodding happily. He was about to ruffle her hair, but stopped himself. He finished combing her hair minutes earlier after drying her off from her bath. All right, let's head to bed. Nodding, the little girl jumped off the stool and bolted for her bed. The bed was massive and far bigger than anything a girl her age would be sleeping in. Talia thought it was the comfiest bed in the world. Following after her, he arrived at her room as Talia was jumping under the covers, watching as she warmed up the bed. Her face popped up from the top of the duvet and promptly began cocooning herself within the soft sheets. The blonde shook his head and came to sit down on the edge of the bed. A side lamp sat on a small table to the left of the bed, bathing a healthy glow across the room. So, Naruto asked, looking down at Talia with a fond gaze, which companion will be sleeping with you tonight? Across the room, sitting opposite the bed, was a line of stuffed animals facing the bed, varying in sizes on top of a toy box. Though Hestia had shopped for clothes, Naruto had taken a brief break from running the fox's den, leaving in the capable hands of his clones to get a couple of stuffed toys for Talia. By a couple, he meant a dozen. He may have gone a little overboard. Talia put her hands up in the air. Henry. I want Henry. What's the magic word? He gave her a knowing look that Talia was quickly beginning to recognize after a couple of days. Please see. Smiling, he crossed the room and picked up Henry, a purple elephant that sat in the middle of the toy box. Why Talia dubbed the elephant Henry was anyone's guess. However, the daughter of Zeus had fallen in love with the stuffed toy the moment her eyes met his sewn button ones. She always took him to bed with her and was seldom without him when they were at home. The only rule was that Henry had to remain at home. He didn't want the stuffed toy to end up lost like so many other stuffed animals. You know, your other stuffed animals are going to get jealous if you keep picking Henry. What about Seymour? Seymour was a green eagle, placed at the end of the row. Where did Talia come up with these names? They wish they knew. Hestia had been there for that one, and was forced to hide her face in her hands from how hard she was cracking up. Of all the names Talia could have picked for her father's sacred animal, Talia shook her tired head. He's the lookout. The lookout. Yeah, he keeps everyone safe. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. Mr. Naruto, Talia said, with Henry comfortably sitting in her arms. When's Auntie Hestia coming back? A yawn broke out from the little girl, and he watched her eyes already beginning to fall heavy with sleep. Not for a couple of days. Auntie Hestia has some odd jobs she needs to get out of the way back home. Oh, Talia replied, leaning on her side with her chin resting on Henry's head. What kind of jobs? Can I help? A hand reached out and gently patted her shoulder. Just grown-up jobs. You know, like I do at the cafe. Your Auntie Hestia is a chef just like I am, and there are lots of people that love her cooking. They love it so much they line up in the streets just to get a bite. Really? She asked, half in wonder and a half in exhaustion. Does she make yummier snacks than you do? The blonde released a low chuckle. She likes to think she does. Was all he said with a wink. Whether his words reached Talia, he didn't know. The daughter of Zeus was asleep in seconds, her body steadily rising and falling with the bed covers. Chuckling, he quietly stood up and tiptoed out of the room, flicking on the night light as he left. Making his way into his bedroom down the hall, he closed his door with a delicate thud. Taking a deep breath, his soft blue eyes grew serious. Stopping at his wardrobe, he opened the doors and knelt on one knee. Running a hand over the smooth bottom, he knocked twice on the wood and watched as the surface propped up, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Prying the top off and setting it beside him, he reached and pulled a familiar pair of uniquely designed chakra blades. The same ones formerly owned by the chain-smoking Jonin that was taken from their world far too soon. The weapons had last been in the care of Mirai, Sarutobi, when they fell into his possession. Somehow, the chakra blades survived the destruction caused by the Great Shift, the day everyone he knew and loved was taken from him in an instant. It took a year of searching through the debris of his old home before he came across them by chance. The blades were one of the few items he kept with him, while others he found were locked and stored away in a safe location known only to him. Now that Talia is asleep, let's deal with our guests, he thought, and before heading over to the window, quietly opening it so as not to spook them, he jumped out and put his old shinobi skills to good use. "Outside, quiet, you fool. Are you trying to scare our meal away?" Kelly screeched, her forked tongue darting in and out of her mouth as she glared at her underling and fellow Impausa. "I'm trying, but you said not to fly. My hoof isn't meant for traveling across the top of a tiled roof." Tammy hissed in reply, trying and failing to keep her balance as the pair neared their target. The Impausa, who were servants and creations of the goddess Hecate, had been traversing through the West District of Manhattan when the most delicious smell wafted up their nose. The scent was like a divine hammer, knocking their senses time after time and pulling them like a magnet, attracting metal. How long had it been since a demigod with such a delectable scent had crossed their paths? 50 years? 60? They weren't sure, but they both agreed it had been far too long. Try as they might, the pair had tried to resist temptation. The scent, however, overwhelmed their senses quicker than either could think. A scent this strong could only belong to a child of the elder gods, specifically one of the big three. Even monsters, such as they had heard that a child of the Olympian king and sky god had come into existence, though neither imagined they would cross paths with the child under the nose of Mount Olympus. It was unwise to insult an elder Olympian like Zeus, but the scent of his daughter, the girl, was mouth-watering. It was just too sweet to ignore. The girl was unassuming, and being so young meant she had no idea of the power and potential she held. It would be easy picking, and the blonde adult they saw walking her home would pose little to no threat. It was an easy meal, and one too good to pass up. The only issue they would face was who got the larger share of their prize, and who got the scraps. Monsters didn't like to share over their kill, especially when it came to demigods. Between the two of them, Kelly often ended up the victor between the pair of Impausa and was confident Tammy would submit to her. She was the most vicious of their kind and would show a level of brutality in her kills that left some wondering if she was the Nemean lion in disguise. "I haven't had a demigod in months," Kelly muttered, her long forkish tongue flicking between her lips. Not since the daughter of Hermes in New Jersey, though her scent wasn't half as delectable as this one. She approached the side of the building and went down onto all fours, her teeth making a loud chattering sound in anticipation. Her slitted eyes hungered for her prey. Steadily she peered over the side of the house with the intention of climbing along the exterior walls and climbing inside through one of the many windows. The air in Manhattan was warm, and with a little bit of luck, a window would be open. A small gust of wind blew across the rooftop. One of her hands came up and pushed the hair out her face. "Now, let's see if dash." Swish abruptly, Kelly's voice cut off. "Kelly," Tammy asked, making her way over to her fellow monster. Leaning in, a strangled gasp broke the eerie silence on the rooftop with the backdrop of the city coming to life. Peering over the ledge, the Impausa turned her head and looked at her self-appointed leader. Her face was a mask of surprise, her slitted eyes wide and her mouth open wide. "What gives? What is it?" She shook her shoulder and was forced to throw herself back while letting out a screech. The moment Kelly's body shook, Tammy watched in horror as the older monster's head rolled off her shoulders and descended to the pavement below. As the head flew through the air, gold dust took over the form of the head, until slowly it was gone with the wind. Kelly's body fell onto the top of the roof, her arm hanging over the tiles of the roof until it too was reduced to nothing but gold dust. Reduced to one. The remaining monster scrambled away from the side of the roof. Her eyes were darting from side to side, looking in every corner, though she didn't dare look over the side of the roof. Whatever had caught them unaware and killed Kelly, Tammy doubted it would leave with one of them dead and spare the other. What was it? She couldn't smell another demigod nearby, nor was there another monster in close proximity to them. To catch Kelly unaware, who begrudgingly she would admit was one of the stronger members of their kind, spoke volumes of their ability. Standing back up, the hairs on the back of Tammy's neck stood on end. Something was watching her. Something was behind her. She swallowed thickly, gradually turning her head to look behind. A dark figure stood there. Their front was shrouded, but Tammy could make out the figure was male. Cold blue eyes stared at her with the promise of death. She idly noticed two shapes in his hands reminiscent of a pair of blades, though the shape was bizarre and unlike anything she recognized. A low whine left her throat, one that was beneath any monster like her to let slip. She wasn't stupid. She could sense the dangerous aura around the man. Her breath hitched in her throat, and in a split second, her wings spread out to their full reach and jumped into the air. She needed to fly away and never look back. It all happened so quickly that Tammy wished she hadn't turned away. She got a foot off the ground when something sharp pierced through the center of her back and exited through the middle of her chest. The breath couldn't leave her body as her form convulsed and fell back to the ground with a low thud. Across from her, a blade with bluish energy flicking around the curved metal impacted the building across the road, spiderweb cracks from the force of the impact spreading across the stone and metal. Darkness quickly took over her vision, and the last thing she could see was the cold blue eyes looking down at her as the figure appeared next to her in a flash of movement. He swung down. Gold dust scattered with the wind, leaving no trace that either monster was on the roof.